we are having today.
Environnement et développement durable.
Welcome to the 33rd meeting of the Environment Committee. Today we're examining the Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. I will not review all the rules. It's quite obvious. If witnesses want to address the committee through the chair, please, and when you don't have the floor, please put your microphone on mute. We have with us today 5 groups of witnesses. Robert McLeeman of the Geography and Environmental Studies Department of Wilfrid Laurier University. From Climate Action Network Canada, we have Caroline Brouillette. Policy analyst. From Équiterre, we have Marc-André Viau and Émile Boisseau-Bouvier. From Mothers Step In, Mère au Front, we have Dr. Kelly Marie Martin and Dr. Laure Waridel. And from Pulse Canada, we are welcoming today Corey Lesson and Greg Northey. So each group of witnesses will have 5 minutes for their opening statements, and then we'll go on to questions from members of the committee. So I'll follow the list that's before me. So I would ask Mr. McLeeman to start the meeting with his presentation for 5 minutes, please. Thank you very much. Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
Je suis aussi également capable de répondre.
But I'm also able to answer questions in French if there are any.
I would like to thank the committee and the committee members for this opportunity to address Bill C-12, which is probably one of the most important public policy initiatives to be undertaken by the Government of Canada in many years. And I hope that my comments and the written brief that I provided earlier will be of some help in further refining the bill and lead to its adoption and implementation. I am an environmental scientist by training, but from 1990 until 2002, I was a Canadian Foreign Service officer, and I served at Canadian embassies and consulates in the former Yugoslavia, India, Hong Kong, Seattle, and Vienna. So I have some practical experience of how federal policies are acted upon once they're implemented. So I left government about 20 years ago, and I've since been a researcher and a professor, specializing in the study of the human impacts of climate change. I was at the University of Ottawa before, now I'm at Wilfrid Laurier. In particular, I specialize in studying how climate change affects human migration, displacement, and what is often referred to in the popular media as environmental refugees. I'm currently serving on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, nominated by the Government of Canada, where I'm a coordinating lead author for a team of 13 scientists from around the world who are currently assessing the impacts of climate change on human health, well-being, migration, and conflict. So what I am going to say now sort of reflects that. Decisions taken by governments today, including this bill, will have a tremendous influence on both our well-being and our economic prosperity for decades to come. And failure to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 will have consequences for our children, including my own, and grandchildren, yet to come, I hope, that can truthfully be described as catastrophic. So just allow me a few brief examples. We're currently entering into a drought spring in Western Canada, with all the challenges that that presents for farmers and for urban municipal watershed managers and so on. And those types of droughts that we've seen in the prairies every 20 to 30 years, the big ones, if we do nothing to control our greenhouse gas emissions, current trajectory, what we see in the second half of this century is up to a 500% increase in the frequency of those severe droughts in Western North America. For every degree Celsius that we warm the planet from today, we increase by about 50% the risk of severe or catastrophic flooding, which affects many of the constituencies represented in this group today. The World Bank has estimated that by the year 2050, a business as usual emission scenario could lead to as many as 140 million people displaced from their homes, primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, Central America, and South Asia. To give you some context, right now the annual number of people displaced worldwide is about 21 million people. So we're looking at a seven-fold increase by 2050. Last year, I was approached by the community of Tuktoyaktuk for advice and assistance on planning the relocation of that community because by 2050, the town site will no longer be viable because of flooding, permafrost loss, and erosion. Point is that these are not hypothetical risks. These are things that are happening or will happen. But the good thing about it is that they are avoidable if we take action such as through Bill C-12. I wish to draw the committee's attention to three specific points in my brief that I submitted. First, with respect to Section 16 in the bill, there is no consequence for failure to achieve the emissions reductions targets that the minister sets. Essentially what happens is the minister is told to formulate a plan for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and if that plan fails, then the minister is instructed to make a new plan. That is how governments in this country have dealt with greenhouse gas emissions policies since we signed the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992. We set targets, we make plans, we miss them, we come up with new plans, and the circle repeats itself. So I think the committee members will recognize that we need to avoid that situation in this bill. Secondly, there are no specific milestones with respect to emissions reduction targets in the bill. It simply says, here are some years, the minister shall set some milestones and move forward like that. We already have targets set by the Government of Canada. We already know what the final destination is. It's 100% reduction in current emissions by the year 2050. So I think it's quite simple at this point to put the targets right in the bill and proceed quickly to making the actual action plans. And finally, just to wrap up my presentation, what is missing from C-12 is a formal mechanism to ensure that the provincial governments and the territorial governments are actively involved in its formulation of plans, in its implementation and execution of those plans. Consultation is not enough. We've seen that. And I'm not naive. I recognize that getting the provincial governments and the federal government to simply agree to something, let alone act upon it, is a big task. But the fact that it's a big task doesn't mean to say that we should not be attempting it and insisting that it be done. And I also recognize that the challenges to reduce greenhouse gas emissions will fall more greatly on certain provinces and sectors than others. At the same time, the benefits of a transition to a green economy in terms of the innovations, the technologies, the economic benefits, and the general improvements in well-being will also fall disproportionately to those sectors and provinces that have the greatest accomplishments. So the reality is this, is that the world is transitioning to a low carbon economy. And Canada is either going to be left behind or it's going to be part of it. I encourage this bill to be part of it. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. McLeeman. We'll now go on to Caroline Brouillette from the Climate Action Change. Thank you. I'm here from unceded land. I represent the Climate Action Network Canada, which represent over 130 unions, development groups, religious groups, Aboriginal groups, and main environmental organizations working on climate change.
Targets for decades and has failed to deliver on every single greenhouse gas emission reduction commitment it has ever made. Canada is the only G7 nation whose emissions remain well above 1990 levels and whose emissions have continued to rise since the signing of the Paris Agreement in 2015. If we missed target after target, it wasn't because those targets were too ambitious or unattainable. Quite the contrary. It is because of the critical lack of climate governance in this country. Le projet de loi C-12.
Bill C-12 gives us an opportunity to correct things, but not without amendment. With our colleagues of Eco-Justice, West Coast Environmental Law and Equitaire, we submitted a briefing note to the committee that emphasizes 5 recommendations to strengthen Bill C-12 to make it robust legislation on Canada's climate responsibility. Those 5 elements are ambitious short-term action, certainty in the medium and long term, credible and effective plans, accountability, and science and expert advice. You heard my colleagues discuss many of these issues that are all very important. I'd like to talk about short-term action and accountability. To reduce the increase of temperature to 1.5 degrees, a critical threshold, we have to completely eliminate carbon from the economy by 2050. Although this long-term objective is important, the path we take to achieve that is also very important. To respect this temperature objective, we have to flatten the curve as fast as possible and start the work now. To use a metaphor, I'm sure that members of the committee remember that starting to study in advance rather than the night before an exam is a good strategy. The absence of a benchmark for 2025 is therefore worrisome. C12 should have a minimum and offer a control point before 2030, including in 2025, and provide progress reports regularly as early as 2023.
Chosen by the drafters of this bill, international examples have clearly shown the benefits of a budgeting approach to facilitate choices that have an impact on emissions. CANRAC still believes Canada would benefit from such an approach, but in the absence of carbon budgets, Bill C-12 must at the very least require plans to show annual emissions projections if it is to come close to having the efficacy of these international examples. Parlons maintenant d'imputabilité, un élément.
Let's now talk about accountability. Legislation elsewhere in the world creates clear accountability about who is responsible for achieving objectives and how they will be achieved. With a financial plan, everybody must be responsible to make sure that all the measures adopted and the commitments balance. This aspect is missing from C12. The minister only has the obligation to set out objectives. It should require that the minister demonstrate that the measures described in the plan collectively respond to the targets. It refers to trying, whereas that should be achieving.
C12 has the potential to end our cycle of broken climate promises and to forge a path for Canada towards a future that is healthier, more resilient, more just, and that prioritizes abundance and well-being for all. We ask all parties to work together to strengthen and adopt C12 swiftly. If you committee members and your colleagues in the House rise to the challenge, history will remember you as the parliamentarians who ushered in a new era of climate accountability in this country. Merci beaucoup. Ça me fera plaisir de répondre à vos questions.
Thank you very much. I'll be pleased to answer your questions. Thank you, Ms. Brouillette. I have two witnesses for Équiterre. Are you going to share the 5 minutes? Yes, it will be shared, Mr. Chairman. Okay, go ahead. Mr. Chairman, dear members of the committee, my name is Marc-Henri Viault. I'm Director of Government Relations, and I will share my time with my colleague. So a few words on our organization. To start with, we've existed for more than 25 years. We have over 150,000 members and sympathizers. We have expertise in climate change, consumption, food systems, both in Quebec and on the federal scene. We recently defended the federal jurisdiction over carbon taxes, and with our colleagues from the Environmental Law Center that you will hear in the next panel. We thank you for giving us the opportunity to exchange on this bill. Reminder first, the first bill on climate accountability was tabled almost 15 years ago now. For all kinds of bad reasons, the bill adopted by the House at the time did not get royal assent in 2010. That was C-311. So one can say that we've already missed the first benchmark, which was to reduce our GES by 20% by 2020 to 1990 levels. I hope we won't miss the boat this time. We've lost your sound. Is it just me? I think we've lost your sound, Mr. Viault. Are you still there? Madam Clerk, can you check? Do you have any indication that the signal was interrupted? I no longer see him in the meeting. He's there. I still see his face. Mr. Chairman, I could continue if there are any glitches. Okay, we stopped the clock. Mr. Viau, would you like to start again? It doesn't seem to be working. I imagine that Madam Clerk I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Boisseau-Bouvier. Yes, I will continue where my colleague had to stop, unfortunately. So we hope we won't miss the boat with history this time and that we'll be there for the rendezvous. In order to do that, we'll need some amendments. The objective here is to identify improvements to be made to the bill to ensure that we have the best mechanisms possible to achieve our objectives. We tabled a bill with eco-justice, West Coast Environmental Law, and Climate Action Network, and we hope that you'll consult that for more details. As you already heard Monday, we've identified 5 pillars to have a solid bill. First of all, we have to act quickly and have ambition. Secondly, we need predictability in the short and long term. Thirdly, plans have to be drafted that are credible. Fourth, it's necessary to have mechanisms for accountability that are robust. And fifth, planning has to be guided by expert advice and the best scientific data. So we'd like to draw your attention to the last 2 pillars. The 4th pillar is very important because of our tendency not to achieve objectives. Right now, in Bill C-12, accountability mechanisms are weak or non-existent. There's no obligation, for example, to have some correspondence between the measures in the bill and the reduction necessary to achieve objectives. So we feel that in response to that problem, the government has to emphasize reducing absolute GES and not compensatory credits or upcoming technology. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have R&D. It means that we should base our decisions on what exists right now and not what we'd like to see in an ideal world. So concretely, we're asking in our brief that the government makes sure that net zero efforts be concentrated on 90% absolute reduction and demonstrate that there is correspondence between the measures and the targets identified. The 5th pillar is just as important. Indeed, Canadians must have some certainty that decisions made on the basis of the best scientific data and not on political compromise. We have to depoliticize these decisions that are sometimes emotional or polarizing, and this would lead to better governance. In the UK, for instance, the Committee on Mitigating Climate Change is completely independent and bases its decisions on scientific evidence, and that works. The advice of the committee is respected by all parties, despite changes in government, and the UK is on a better path than Canada to achieve its GES reduction objectives. For Bill C-12, it's essential that the objectives and plans be based on the best scientific information available. Right now, Clause 8 specifies that the minister just has to take into account the best scientific advice to establish targets. That means that the information would be based on the best scientific advice to achieve net zero and respect Canada's commitments in the Paris Accord. Yesterday, the International Energy Board said that no new fossil fuel project can be authorized if we want to limit the increase in temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is essential to make a credible decision. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, Bill C-12 has potential to become a structuring bill that will allow Canada to achieve its objectives. In order for this to be the case, we urge parliamentarians to increase the number of amendments as we suggest, and that our other colleagues suggest as they have appeared before you. Thank you to all of you. We will be pleased to answer your questions. Thank you, Mr. Boisseau-Bouvier. We'll now go on to Maire au Front. We have 2 witnesses once again for that group. Are you sharing this time, or is either one of you going to be speaking?
that will be speaking,
Okay.
and Dr. Warredel will answer questions.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay. I am here today on behalf of tens of thousands of mothers, fathers, and grandparents across Canada, represented by two national networks, Mère au Front and For Our Kids. For Our Kids is across Canada from coast to coast, and Mère au Front in many provinces, with tens of thousands of people who are asking for climate change action. We are here to ask you, no matter what your political party is, to take courageous action on the climate crisis. We desperately need a Climate Accountability Act in Canada that will protect our children from the climate emergency. But the bill is not ambitious enough, and we have concrete proposals to make it the bill our children need. First and foremost, you must know that our population and our children are already dying from the effects of climate change. For instance, a 2021 publication from the Harvard School of Public Health shows close to 900 babies die annually in North America as a result of particulate matter in our air, which is a direct result of burning fossil fuels. The evidence shows that increasing temperatures, heat waves, and the emissions from burning fossil fuels not only exacerbate child respiratory illness and death, but cause it. If you have any excuses in your mind for not taking bolder action on the climate crisis, I invite you to let me walk you through one of the many cases that I've seen in our pediatric emerge of a perfectly well baby losing their life because they cannot breathe. As wildfires rage through many of our provinces as we speak, droughts threaten our food security and farming livelihood, and deaths from extreme heat events become more common, we as parents feel strongly that it is our job to be sure that you protect our children. This is why we are here before you today, and we feel very strongly that 4 aspects of Bill C-12 must be improved if this bill is to protect current and future generations. First, a key aspect is that our kids need a Climate Accountability Act with real accountability to ensure that the incremental targets are met. This means an impartial advisory committee. The majority of this committee must be experts in climate science and exclude industry representatives. The committee, as it exists, must be reassessed. The UK's climate accountability law, as one of the previous speakers said, is working because when they have an arm's length, truly expert-led advisory committee that can take action when the government decisions threaten the commitments to targets. Second, Bill C-12 must be a race to carbon neutrality. We need to go faster than what is proposed in this bill. The science about this is very clear. Reset the first target to 2025 with a clear plan from now until then. Canada is already 30 years late in meeting its climate goals, so deferring until 2030 sets us up to fail. Third, Bill C-12 must be modified to ensure that every decision taken by the government goes through a climate test in order to evaluate how policies will impact our reduction targets. Because greenhouse gas emissions transcend jurisdictions and sectors, we need to ensure that all government decisions are in harmony with our climate goals. Finally, it is the responsibility of the government, and that is you, to ensure intergenerational equity and to take actions that protect future generations. Our children cannot vote, but it is them that will be impacted the most by a bill whose present targets would result in a rise in temperature of 3 degrees in their lifetimes. We are asking you to remember your obligation to their future as you work to change these targets to match the science. This is the fight for our children's lives. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us what happens when we put short-term economic benefits ahead of their lives and the long-term economic success of Canadians. The climate crisis is not different. I believe that all of you, as members of different political parties, care about the future of our kids and your kids and understand that our industry and economy has to change rapidly to compete internationally, given the reality of the climate crisis. Our kids are looking to you to ensure a livable planet and jobs in the new or the green economy that will sustain their generation in the future. We are not asking for more than Canadians want, nor are we asking you more than you can deliver. Our children deserve your action and your protection. They need you to act as courageous politicians in this crisis to ensure them a livable future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. We'll go to Pulse Canada. Again, we have two witnesses, and I'll repeat the question. Are you splitting time, or is one going to be reading the opening remarks?
I'll give opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Okay, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to the committee on behalf of 30,000 Canadian pulse growers. I am Corey Leeson. I farm with my wife and son northwest of Saskatoon, and we grow peas, lentils, canola, wheat, oats, barley. We've farmed here for 30 years, and my family has farmed on the same land for 125 years. For the past year, I've served as chair of the board of Pulse Canada, and Pulse Canada is a national organization that represents growers, traders, processors, and exporters of Canadian pulses, including peas, lentils, chickpeas, dry beans, and faba beans. And our membership consists of grower organizations across the country from Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and also the Canadian Special Crops Association, representing over 100 processors and exporters of pulses. Canada is the world's largest exporter of pulses crops. Our pulse industry is well established and continues to grow in terms of acres seeded and domestic and international demand. We export pulses to over 130 countries around the world, with priority markets in China, India, the EU, and the United States. In 2017, pulse industry established a 25 by 25 objective, an industry-wide goal seeking to increase or to provide 25% of our Canadian production into new diversified markets and new end uses by the year 2025. Our strategy is to create new demand for Canadian pulses while finding efficiencies in the trade environment and continuing to keep existing markets open. Pulses are very well established or very well positioned to take advantage of emerging global food trends that emphasize healthy and sustainable diets and food products. And while sustainability may not be the leading factor including or influencing consumer food choices, we believe it's going to become increasingly important as the world finds a way to feed a growing population with nutritious food from sustainable food systems. At Pulse Canada, we have two goals that drive our sustainability work. One is to create conditions that growers, processors, and exporters seize high-value market opportunities resulting from global sustainability commitments. And second is to establish a Canadian pulse sector as a leader in providing food and ingredient solutions that drive Canada's carbon reduction targets and demonstrate our industry as a global leader in fighting climate change. With reference to Bill C-12, of course, if Canada is to capitalize on the tremendous opportunity in front of us, we must show some leadership at the policy level. Pulse Canada fully endorses policy that creates market-driven conditions for growers, processors, and exporters to monetize commitments being made to global environmental sustainability. Pulses and pulse ingredients are some of the most sustainable foods around due to their capacity to fix nitrogen, their water use efficiency, and their contribution to soil health. Thanks to the world-leading stewardship practices of our producers, Canadian pulses are a leader among sustainably grown crops. As the conversation around sustainability grows, so does the expectation of Canadian pulse growers and the trade to realize and monetize the opportunity that exists. With Bill C-12, the government is seeking to outline Canada's path to achieving net zero. By the year 2050, Canada's pulse industry will play a key role in achieving those targets. I think there's real economic opportunity in meeting the global food demand for ingredients produced in a sustainable manner, and this demand that has been created by the marketplace. Market-driven solutions are the way that Canadian businesses will be able to remain competitive. It is important to each and every farmer that has the opportunity to meet this global growing global demand on his or her terms as small business owners. To ensure that Canada's path to net zero is market-driven, Pulse Canada is advocating for seats on the advisory bodies to be allocated to Canadian agriculture, both farmers and representatives from the broader agriculture value chain. Government should look to the expertise our industry has already gained from having been involved in lowering emissions for the past several decades. And I can tell you that on our own farm, we've seen tremendous gains being made in soil conservation in particular and soil health. Finally, please note that Canada exports about 85% of the pulse crops we grow. There's more than one way to meet climate targets, and the correct path forward must take a broader look at how Canada meets its targets by supporting and expanding free trade. By investing in trade-enabling infrastructure and supporting agricultural exports, the government can ensure that Canada continues to be a key player in the world's net zero solution. In closing, I'd like to make it clear or reemphasize that agriculture sector, and specifically the Canadian pulse sector, will be a major contributor to Canada's success on the path to net zero.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you, Mr. Leeson. So we'll go to our rounds of questioning. We start with our 6-minute round, which will be led off today by Mr. Redekop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to all the witnesses. And I really do thank you all for being here and sharing your thoughts and knowledge with us today. And I just want to pick up right from there with Pulse Canada. I know that Saskatchewan is a huge producer of agricultural products, including pulse crops, like you mentioned. And Mr. Leeson, you'll be very well aware of a company called Flexicoil. I spent 20 years at that company. And one of the things that the company did was it innovated in air seeder technology, which allowed the zero tillage change to come to agriculture, which was essentially a market-driven approach to innovation that had all kinds of advantages and many of them environmental. And so I guess I'd like to ask you maybe just to reinforce or explain the importance of market-driven solutions to reducing emissions in the farming sector.
Well, that is a great analogy, because the move to zero till through my career really, over the last 30 years, has just been a tremendous benefit in Western Canada. Soil erosion has gone from catastrophic, I would say, in the early 80s to almost non-existent today. And that's all been market-led, as you mentioned, farmers embracing that change in farming systems, really, as a result of technology being available and the market enabling them to adopt that technology. So in a similar way, I should also add that on our farm, in that same time period, our fuel consumption has dropped by approximately 50%, just because we are not using tillage to work the land anymore. So many less field passes, if you like. So anytime you can see an example like that, where there has been technology and market pull come together to enable a system to adapt and farmers to embrace that system and employ it, it's just a success story. And the same thing can happen, or it is happening, and can happen further with regard to how emissions and crop rotations can further enhance the drive to get to a net zero position in the future.
Thanks. And your group has been very vocal for free trade agreements to opening foreign markets. And as you say, pulses are almost all exported out of Canada. And buyers need certainty. And I guess one thing that I've seen the Liberals have been really good at is adding uncertainty to businesses in Canada. For example, changes to the regulations on the natural resource development programs that we've seen in the country. But recently, the Liberals shifted the environmental goalposts on a few things. Carbon tax, for example, is now 3-4 times what it was originally supposed to be. And then just recently, emissions targets have gone from 30 to 36 to 45. So do these shifting goalposts cause problems for farmers? And does this lack of certainty cause problems for your overseas customers?
Two points I could add there. There's certainly shifting goals. Farm businesses is a long-term enterprise, and so you have to plan for the long term. Many of the practices that we employ are put in place for the long-term benefit, and in our case, it's mostly about the soil. Preserving the soil is so important, and so we have long-term strategies and methods to do the best we can over that period of time. So when things change, yes, you have to adapt, but when costs increase suddenly or dramatically, essentially the effect is that it restricts your ability to adapt. A lot of the adaptation to, say, zero tillage, like we mentioned before, it did require considerable investment on behalf of farmers. If cost increases restrict the ability to adapt as needed, it slows that process down, I would say. Mm-hmm. On the second point about reliability to export customers, absolutely critical. We have a number of pieces of our export chain, if you like, that experience problems from time to time, and that always concerns our export customers. The more reliable a supplier we can be to huge markets like India and like China, and I should add quality markets like the EU. The more reliable we can be, the better off the whole industry is, both in short and long run.
I have one last question I want to ask you here. Canada is very diverse in terms of agriculture in different provinces. Saskatchewan, we grow a lot of lentils and peas, Manitoba, sunflowers, et cetera. If we had the opportunity to strengthen this legislation with some amendments, such as forcing the government to consider regional economic impacts, do you believe that would benefit farmers?
It would, and in fact, it's really necessary, because the regional differences between my farm in Saskatchewan and a farm in Manitoba and a farm in Ontario are quite different, and there needs to be ability to manage that on a regional basis to the best of the farmer's ability and the needs of the environment that you operate in. And so I think regional adaptation is absolutely critical.
Okay. Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Biddle for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'd like to pick up on that a little bit. And I guess concerned with the talk of being critical of more ambitious climate goals. I was wondering if I could turn to Professor McLeeman. You talked about sorry if I misquoted you, but a 500% increase in droughts in Western Canada. What's the regional economic impact for that? If we're being critical, or if certain witnesses are being critical of more ambitious policy, are you able to quantify what that consequence would be in terms of regional economic devastation for the prairies?
Well, for a couple of thoughts. One is that is the worst case scenario. That is the case where we continue to essentially follow the trajectory we're on in terms of taking coal, oil, and natural gas out of the ground as quickly as we can and burning it as quickly as we can. Hopefully we don't go down that pathway, as what scientists refer to as an 8.5 RCP scenario. And yes, I mean, water scarcity is an ongoing challenge in Western North America. So that's there will be localized variations in that. In terms of the economic impacts of a 500% increase in drought severity or frequency in Western Canada, I don't think anybody has actually sat down in terms of the agricultural economics of that. But I think it's fairly easy to calculate if one wanted to, in terms of just looking at what are the insured crop losses that will occur, say, over the next 5-year period, and then you can make some extrapolations. Plus, then you have the urban impacts. A city like Edmonton, for example, needs to have a certain amount of surface water in the river in order to accept waste water for treatment and to provide drinking water and so on. So these are quantifiable. And obviously, you can assume it's a very simple math that a 500% increase in frequency or severity of droughts would have a corresponding economic cost. But then again, I've also studied historical droughts, such as the ones of the 1970s on the Great Plains. And there's often sort of a cascading effect, is that the drought is just the start of an economic crisis. So if you look at the 70s and 80s, droughts on the Great Plains coincided with a period of rising interest rates. And so many farmers found that the drought actually put them into a position where they were borrowing money to get through the drought, and then interest rates rose, and that helped trigger the farm crisis in the United States of the 1980s. All this to say, Mr. Biddle, that yes, quantifiable, and obviously something we would want to avoid.
I appreciate that. And I go back to your testimony with respect to Section 16 and there being no consequences. What's your recommendation going forward then for if there were to be consequences for a government?
That's where I would not want to venture too far into recommendations, because I'm not a policymaker, I'm not a government official. But I would look to other pieces of federal legislation for what happens when government agencies fail to follow through on their obligations under the law. And in some cases, that involves actual legal obligations and penalties, financial or otherwise, for agencies that fail to comply with the law of the land. So I won't make any specific recommendations. Maybe other witnesses have some specific ones. But a law that says if you fail, that's okay to fail, try again, that's really not helping. I would put it in these terms. I give my students assignments in school. And so my first year students, if they don't turn in an assignment, I don't then say, oh, that's too bad. Here's another assignment. Try doing this one. And they don't turn it in. There's a consequence. And so I'd say that for this law to be meaningful, it has to have a consequence for inactivity.
I appreciate your comments. If I can go to Equiterre, Section 23 of the bill creates a new obligation on the Minister of Finance to prepare an annual report respecting key measures that the federal public administration has taken to manage its financial risks and opportunities related to climate change. Would you agree that having this kind of disclosure is important for strengthened climate governance? And if so, why?
Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Can you hear me now? Yes, okay. I'm so sorry. Could you please repeat your question, because I was concentrating on my mic to make sure it... yes, Mr. Biddle, could you repeat your question, please?
We're 15 months into this crisis, and we'll all eventually figure out this Zoom thing. I find myself in the same boat quite a bit, so I appreciate that. So Section 23 of the bill creates a new obligation on the Minister of Finance to prepare an annual report respecting key measures the federal public administration has taken to manage its financial risks and opportunities related to climate change. Would you agree that having this kind of disclosure is important for strengthened climate governance?
Donc, en réponse à votre question...
Well, to answer your question, the answer is easy, yes. But now, more transparency in all circumstances is a good approach, but accountability should not be limited to transparency. In order to ensure the best transparency possible, we'd like the advice of the committee to be made public systematically.
Mr. Biddle?
Thank you so much. I saw Dr. Martin with her hand up. Did she want to answer that question as well? I'm happy to put it, or it was just an accident. If not, then I'll move along to the Climate Action Network of Canada. Section 20 provides for the creation of an expert and independent advisory body. In my view, it's an important measure to ensure that Canada can count on the best advice possible on a path to net zero. Do you agree that having an expert independent advisory body is important, and could you explain why?
Very briefly, please.
Oui, merci. C'est très important.
Yes, thank you. It is very important indeed to have an advisory body that is independent and that provides advice to the government, not only on the plans it has to achieve its objectives, but also be accountable on the whole issue. But I would point out that the scientific expertise should be reinforced by asking that some expertise be provided by members. Okay, now we'll like to go on to either Ms. Posé or Ms. Michaud. Go ahead. Well, first of all, I thank the witnesses for their presence and their expertise. It's greatly appreciated. My question is for Ms. Brouillette, first of all. We were talking about GES reduction targets. In its current form, the bill doesn't have any such target. There's Clause 7 that provides for the minister setting out targets 7 months after the bill is passed, but the minister assured me that its new 40 to 45% reduction would be inserted in the bill. There are projections by the Environment Department that says there's a deficiency. There were measures announced in the 2021 budget that said we'd arrive to 36% reductions. In your opinion, is this range of targets sufficient, even if it's inserted in the bill? And how could the bill be amended to reinforce all this? Yes, thank you for the question. First of all, I think it's important to note that it's a good idea to revise the target periodically. That's part of the Paris Accord. Parties have to review their targets every 5 years normally. So we welcome this new decision by the government, but it's still insufficient to represent Canada's fair share of the worldwide effort to restrain the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We've evaluated that a fair share would be about 60% and include 80% reduction under 2005 levels. So 80% reduction compared to southern countries. So this said, C12 should reflect the Paris Accord. The targets should be increased only. Increase your ambition. As you said, the Clause 7 should be amended to allow for that. And we take advantage of this because I heard other things earlier on the certainty for markets. The idea that we recommended was to set these targets 10 years ahead of time to bring about certainty to markets and investors. When they have to be revised midway, as the Paris Accord requires, the difference should be less significant if you start earlier. Thank you. You were talking about the fact that there was a lot of trying in this bill rather than a constraint to achieve targets. So I'm wondering whether it's just ambitious. Should we also put a target, a minimum target for greenhouse gas emission reductions, such as the Paris Accord target? That would be some kind of additional legal requirement. For instance, if the measures announced by the government are not all implemented, if there's a new government that takes power in a few years, for instance, and this isn't implemented, should we have some kind of guarantee and implement a minimum target in the bill? Yes, I think it would be a good idea to have it inserted in the bill. However, with our colleagues, we do see C12 as a government's framework. So it's a little less important to our mind that the exact figure be in the bill. What we want to see is that all the mechanisms and processes will assure us that the government is accountable by clearly identifying who's responsible for achieving the objective, how we will achieve that. The language has to be clear. I'm not a lawyer. I did a minor in law, and that was sufficient for me, but maybe my colleagues who are lawyers and experts on this issue, they've told us that language is very important. The wording is very important. There has to be language like shall, must, achieve, rather than try, attempt, or permit. Thank you. Discussing this with the minister and an ADM yesterday, there's the CDM talked about a lot. this new national contribution that Canada has to submit to the Paris Accord soon. How would C12 and the CDM process work together? It seems to us that these are two mechanisms that should be related. So I'd like to hear your views on that. Yes, indeed. Those mechanisms should be linked. The Paris Accord does not impose targets on signatories. It is the targets themselves that provide this national contribution, which is known as the NDC in English. Every 5 years, the Paris Accord stipulates that countries have to communicate a new target to the UN agreement, and under the agreement, countries have to regularly account for programs in the implementation of their NDC. So ideally, you have to synchronize this, and that would translate into greater climate accountability, because they follow a similar cycle that would force Canada to present targets every 5 years. So reporting on progress is a minimum requirement on an international level, and that's why we recommend that C12 include corrective action when the government does not meet its targets, especially progress reports that should force the government to specify what measures will be taken to remedy the situation when an objective has not been or will not be achieved. Mr. Beckrecht, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses. My first question is for Ms. Briette. I hope I'm pronouncing your name okay, in the ballpark. You spoke about near-term action and the importance of near-term action, and I'm curious about this. I wonder why we should expand our ambition on near-term actions as opposed to focusing on strategies that might take longer to spool up and don't kick in until the final years of the decade leading to 2030. Why is that short-term ambition and short-term action so important?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. That was fine pronunciation of my last name, let me reassure you. The short-term ambition is important because the IPCC, or GIEC in French, tells us that to restrain temperature to under 1.5 Celsius, that will avoid the most irreversible and catastrophic effects of climate change. Not only must we achieve net zero emissions by 2050, but the trajectory we use will be very important. So the curve has to be flattened, to use an expression we heard a lot with COVID. Canada is a wealthy country that has a historical responsibility. We have to do more than average in this world. And apparently the average will be 45% by 2030, according to the IPCC. So this is so complex. This transformation is so drastic that if we don't do this as of today, if we don't plan by inserting some control point for accountability before 2030 and make sure we have annual modeling of these emissions, we can't postpone this forever.
Thank you for the response. Moving on, the International Energy Agency came out with a big report yesterday modeling out a pathway to 2050. I'm sure you're familiar with it. I wonder if you could speak to what the committee should take from that report in the context of C12. What lessons does that report hold for the importance of this accountability legislation in guiding Canada's progress over the next decade?
Merci, c'est une bonne question, mais je pense que...
Thank you. That's a good question, but I think that this opinion in terms of concrete policy gives us many different paths. It informs us about the role of science. That's what that report does. It looks at this from a scientific viewpoint and sees what we have to do to reduce our emissions to remain under that critical threshold of 1.5 degrees. I could talk about many things, the need to stop expanding the fossil fuel industry, the need to stop selling internal combustion vehicles. The liquid natural gas sector will peak relatively soon. So there are many observations, but what has to be done through C12 is look at the various mechanisms, the observations of science, and apply them in a Canadian context to make sure we achieve our objectives.
Thank you, Ms. Briette. I'm going to turn now to Mr. Viau. And you mentioned a couple of things I found very interesting. One was the focus on a 90% absolute reduction in emissions. Now, the question around offsets is a very important one. I know Mark Jacquard, who's done a lot of policy work in British Columbia, has a very strong view on this and asserts that we should only be allowing offsets that either sequester carbon underground or directly capture it from the air, that these more loosey-goosey arrangements should not be part of our climate commitments. Could you speak to what that other 10% could include and why it's so important that we focus on absolute reductions?
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you for your question, sir. Mr. Chairman, we recommend that there be absolute reductions, because what's been attempted in the past is that there were offset systems or technology that is unproven. In order to have a roadmap that works, we have to be based on what exists already. As my colleague said, because my microphone stopped working, unfortunately, as he pointed out, reductions that are required and that can be planned are existing reductions. What we can continue to do R&D and figure out technology that will sequester carbon. We might have nature-based solutions. We talked about that earlier and at the last meeting. Nature-based solutions in agriculture, for instance. But if we base ourselves on non-existent technology, it's probability and nothing concrete. What we want to make sure of is that what we produce right now can lead to reductions now, not eventually.
Go into our second round, which is the 5-minute round. We'll start with Mr. Generu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for all joining us today virtually. I want to address some questions with Pulse Canada, and further my opening comments. Mr. North, you won't hold it against you that you're in the province of Manitoba today, being the NHL playoffs are starting. But hopefully, we can get a good collaborative responses regardless of who wins here. So it seems to me we've heard a lot about. Nobody seems really to be that happy with Bill C-12, regardless where you are on the political spectrum, for a variety of reasons. However, there's a lot of what some of the criticisms we've heard are based on the advisory panel, and so we know the panel's already been created before the bills even got royal consent. But want to get yours and Mr. Lausanne's comments on if you're feeling that there's that voice from your industry, particularly on this panel, and what you'd like to see any perhaps revisions and focus in terms of where the panel has its focus in the months and years ahead.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. Obviously we approach a bill like this from the standpoint that it's not in the abstract. We're going to set these huge targets for the country. It's going to involve an incredible mobilization of Canadians, of Canadian industry. And we need to understand how the targets we're setting are going to, be reached by the agriculture sector and pulse growers, and the kind of innovations that need to go into that, and what the impact it's going to have on growers in Canada. And so The bill contemplates an advisory council. We've seen an advisory council formed already. The Net Zero Advisory Council was formed in February. So there's nobody on that represents agriculture, that can understand agriculture, that can understand the realities of a farmer like Corey and the many other business men across the country and women across the country who are farming, and what the impact of these targets or how they're going to help reach these targets. And so we would really suggest that, to make it viable, to make it so that everyone is trying to meet these targets together, that the input from those on the ground who are going to be essential to meet the targets are included on any kind of advisory panel like that.
Great. Corey, from your perspective as a farmer, what would a farmer or someone from the industry bring to that advisory panel that we could perhaps make that amendment or recommendation to the minister?
Thank you for the question. And to add what Greg said, the industry needs to be involved and needs to adapt, certainly. One of the things that was mentioned previously was around soil sequestration of carbon. And you can look at the progress that has been made, particularly in Western Canada. And in fact, it's right on one of the government's websites. It shows the increase in soil organic matter across Western Canada over the last 10 years. And so to have agriculture representation in the advisory panel that can show how things are evolving and what can happen into the future, specifically with respect to soil sequestration and how that enables the country to meet its targets. I mean, quite frankly, the country can't meet its targets without agriculture, and that's just the reality of the situation. So why not have those involved that are actually doing it, and find ways to perhaps do it better. But yeah, the reality is that the country can't meet the targets without agriculture being involved. So why not have them involved at the decision-making level and at the advisory level?
Great. I think I only have about 30 seconds left, but I do just want to reiterate that I think you're absolutely right, and I know we've heard from others. Having those stakeholders at the table will make a huge difference in terms of seeing a successful piece of legislation going forward. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn my time back.
Thank you, Mr. General. Mr. Longfield.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for a very good discussion this afternoon, and to my colleagues for the questions that are coming forward. I wanted to start with Mr. McLeeman from our neighboring riding, but I know that you are also a graduate of the University of Guelph, so a proud alumnus of that. You've done a lot of work around the securitization theory, the theory around the human impacts of climate change. And from that, the citizens' engagement in environmental science, where the human dimensions are considered. I'm looking at Section 10, where the goals are being set. Section 10 has to do with the emissions reduction plan, and then Section 20 has to do with the advisory body that would be reporting on that. Could you comment on how important it is to include the human impact of climate change in our bill, as well as any international obligations that we might have towards climate change impacts around the world from a human level?
Thank you for the question. And yes, I love Guelph, Ontario, and enjoyed my time greatly at the university there. One of the greatest agricultural schools in the world, as far as I'm concerned. Yes, I think we've been talking a lot about the economic impacts of what we need to do to move to a green economy. So, and this is the type of discussion that you see at these conferences of the parties for the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which I've attended, and where you'll see the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia saying, forget about the impacts of climate change, what about the impacts on our economy? And so I hear the conversation is revolving around that dimension, which is very real. Don't get me wrong. And even though I don't farm pulses in Saskatchewan, my pension plan probably benefits from a lot of the agricultural industry that's based in Saskatchewan and so on. But at the same time, there are human impacts. And so I mentioned in my talk about the community of Tuktoyaktuk, where by 2050, they will have to move. And so that's a big deal for people, especially Indigenous people who have lived in the same place for a long time and who are told that because of actions for which they have no responsibility, they must now leave and move their homes and their families, their schools, and so on. And it's a small microcosm of the risks that we face if we do not implement this bill and move quickly towards actually achieving net reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Dr. Martin spoke earlier about the health impacts, and that's something I've been working with the IPCC on our reporting right now, which is looking at not just the health impacts, but also the co-benefits to human health of addressing greenhouse gas emissions. Because, of course, 4 million people each year worldwide die because of air pollution. So if we reduce greenhouse gas emissions that are not only just causing climate change, but also causing urban air quality problems and child health issues and so on, we can actually have win-win situations. And those cascading risks that we create for ourselves by not addressing greenhouse gas emissions, we can reverse in the other direction. So to circle back to your initial point, you're right, it is an economic conversation, but it is also a conversation about who we are as people and the quality of our life and our broader well-being beyond just our pocketbooks.
Right. Thank you. And near the end of your testimony, you mentioned provincial jurisdictions and the governance issues around that and how we might want to include that in our bill in some way or another. I know you said you weren't a policy writer, but is there an idea that you had in mind there?
Well, if you look at Canada's greenhouse gas emissions over the last 2 decades, you will see that the greatest public policy decision to reduce them was the Ontario government's decision to eliminate coal from its electrical generation plants. And that had, again, that human health benefit of reducing air pollution and air quality problems in Southern Ontario. So there's a perfect example of how having that kind of decision, which must be made at the provincial level, built into the steering of this particular piece of legislation will essentially be essential to achieving the long-term goals.
Thank you. And I think that's a challenge that maybe the UK doesn't face to the same extent as us, but we have had some comment on that. I'd like to go over to Dr. Martin, and the mention was made about the Nanticoke plant closing down. I have asthma. I don't have as much difficulty now that the coal-fired plant is gone. A nod towards our generation, but future generations should be included in some way. Is that what you were suggesting to us?
Yes. So we're talking about 2 things. One is, you have asthma, and adults are certainly affected with increased deaths from cardiac and respiratory events, and we know that. So, but really, I'm 30 years working in the emergency department, and where we had a handful of kids. Now, it is no exaggeration to say that our resuscitation bays are full of kids who can't breathe. Our hospitals are full of kids. And when I hear my family was in the lumber business, my family are all conservatives for many generations. And we did clear cutting because we were following the market economy, and we have really lost our business. And those conservatives are not interested anymore in discussions that don't include climate change. They know that it's affected their lives, their businesses, and their children. So yes, there is the impact in the hospitals that we are seeing. And I honestly, in the last 2 months, have had a child of 6 months and 9 months die in front of us. They have no genetic history. They have no family history. They're perfectly well babies. And we have high levels and they can't breathe. And, my family depends on the lumber business. We care.
The chair is ringing the gong on us. Thank you very much. Thank you for that.
Thank you. On passe maintenant au bloc.
We'll now go on to the bloc. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I will be the one speaking. I will speak to Maire au Front. I read your brief. You say that climate action must have a constricted and pan-government approach with a test that's applicable to all important government decisions. So you're saying that the government should check all its decisions through this, as the government just already does when in case of race or gender. Can you explain how this climate test could take shape in C12? Absolutely. Thank you for your question, Ms. Michaud. I'm greatly appreciative. We see very clearly when we consult the scientific community, and we heard it again today, humanity is at a crossroads, and the window is closing fast when it comes to the possibility of putting a halt to all the effects of climate change on health. We know that all the measures were good intentions so far, and we did not achieve our objectives. From now on, all decisions have to go through this test of climate impact. When we say we're at a crossroads, we have to ask ourselves, does this regulation, this law, this tax measure, etc., lead us to an increase in greenhouse gases, or on the contrary, does it help us reduce greenhouse gases? That question should be asked by all those who make decisions within the government apparatus, the federal level, and insofar as possible, see how this can be transformative in policies applicable to the provinces and all those who interact with the federal government. That seems fundamental, because as long as we don't have mechanisms of that type, we'll continue to hear that we want to reduce greenhouse gases, but we'll continue to subsidize fossil fuels. Right now, we're funding increases in greenhouse gases. Since the beginning of COVID, 30 billion in public funds were given to that sector. We know that Trans Mountain is going to cost over $12.6 billion. These are measures that, if you look at things through a climate lens, wouldn't be done. On the contrary, we should be helping people to transition toward another sector, not help the ones that we have to be solidary with the people of Newfoundland and Alberta and Saskatchewan. That transition has to be done with all of us together, but all our decisions have to go through this lens of climate change. Thank you. Mr. Bacharach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Picking up where I left off, Mr. Viau, you talked about the connection between measures and targets and the failure of the bill as it's currently written to directly connect those two things. Why is that so important, and what is the risk if we don't amend the bill to strengthen the connection between the measures and the targets?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for your question, sir. We saw this in the past. We missed our targets because we didn't have the measures in the plans that respond to meeting objectives. If there's no link immediately, if there's no direct link in the bill between the measures in the plans, and there's no demonstration that this will work, we'll end up in the same situation. So there has to be that link, not only in reality, but it has to be in the bill as well. The objective, the target, will be achieved thanks to the measures in the plans.
Thank you for that response. Turning to Ms. Briette, a question about carbon budgets, which you mentioned in your introductory comments. We've had quite a bit of discussion about these two different approaches. And we've heard from the government, from the minister at our previous meeting, that he doesn't feel like it was the right approach for Canada. Do you feel that the carbon budget approach would work in Canada, given the way the Federation is structured, and why is that?
Well, first of all, a word about carbon budgets. What they do is allow us to get greater clarity when the time comes to make decisions that have an impact on our emissions, be it regulations, infrastructure. To use a metaphor, if I want to save 45% of my spending in the next 9 years, it will help me to know how much I have in my bank account and how much I can spend over shorter periods of time than 9 years. Otherwise, I'll never manage. So I reiterate that for our organization, such an approach is always relevant for Canada, even though it was not chosen by the government. We feel that it is possible in the context of a federation because the federal government has tools at its disposal, such as federal regulations, fiscal policy as well, spending powers. But if we want to make sure there's a minimum of transparency in plans and reports, the bill has to be amended so that the plans have annual modeling of emissions. And I'd also indicate that in future work, this is something that the advisory board has to look at.
Do I have more time, Mr. Chair?
Nope.
Nope.
Sorry.
Sorry,
Mr. Vaclac, you actually were given much more time than is normally indicated, but it was a good question and good answers, and we'll go to Ms. McLeod.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. Again, we're having, I think, what is a really important dialogue. I have two things that I hope to accomplish in my 5 minutes, and one is sort of just a quick follow-up in terms of the net zero advisory body. I do find it, perhaps the government should have waited for this legislation to pass, because we're having some good dialogue about what an advisory panel would look like. We've had one person here that said it should absolutely just be scientists with no industry involvement. And of course, we had Mr. Leeson who talked about how, industry could add so much to the debate. And if you, of course, look at the current component of the advisory committee, it's a little bit, although all very knowledgeable people, I'm not sure that the government waited for the best advice possible. So my personal perspective is that we can get further when we include industry, because we understand the challenges, but we also can understand what they can accomplish. So I think we can all agree on the importance of pulses to our diets, not just in Canada, worldwide. You see that more and more people are moving in a, their diet is increasing in terms of pulses. So I guess I just want to quickly get Mr. Leeson to address that issue again, and then I hope to go to some more generic questions after that. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for the question. And yes, just to reiterate, I mean, the pulse crop farmers are farmers, including other crops in their rotation for necessary reasons, certainly. But pulse crops have been a growing and very beneficial component in our crop rotation in Saskatchewan here for 30 some years. So having perhaps farmers or at least industry representation on an advisory committee that can help, as you say, shape the direction forward and what more can be achieved makes complete sense. And the industry can help point out where things can be improved to enable that improvement going into the future. So I think it is a completely logical addition to such an advisory panel.
Thank you. And we had the cattlemen 2 days ago. And of course, what I didn't know, and I live in ranching country, is the important contribution to the grasslands and the health of the grasslands and the sequestration in terms of that particular industry. But I guess I've been the last 5 years, I've been focused in terms of the Indigenous file. So of course, I think I can still sort of say I'm a rookie to the environment file. So for those that are much more knowledgeable, I'd really appreciate, as this bill is clearly process. It's about a process, and we hear from from all people that have been before us, it's even kind of flawed in terms of what their process would be. But when we talk about net zero, and maybe Mr. McLeeman would be the best. So Canada was basically shut down in a significant way last year. How much impact did that have in terms of our emissions? How much did that bring us towards our goal? And how can you sort of tell Canadians that might be listening, what would a future look like in terms of, is it like it was last year where no one was getting in their cars, no one was flying? Could you tell us a little bit about that so that Canadians that are listening might understand better what we're trying, what Canada's trying to achieve?
Sure. And yes, so greenhouse gas emissions in Canada their increase essentially stopped over the last year because you're right, people did stay home, work closer to home, industry was shut down. I don't think that's what's being advocated for here. I think what we're looking for is for economic growth that's based on an energy-based economy, but that where oil and gas is not necessarily the basis of the energy source. And so that's one of the things that I think we need to look at in the future is that no one's, I think, projecting that net zero means that we go back to horse and buggies. In fact, the reason we got rid of horse and buggies was not because we ran out of hay to feed the horses, it's because a better technology came along. And we are at that threshold now in society technologically where the reason we are getting away from gasoline-powered automobiles and other devices and things that run on fossil fuels is not because we're running out of fossil fuels in the short term, but it's because there's better technologies in place. And so the report that came out from the International Energy Agency yesterday, one of the things we should take away from it is that the necessary technologies and innovations to achieve net zero already exist. So the science bit has already been done. The key is how do we make the transition to an economy that's based on those new technologies and innovations. And so it's possible, I think, is the message I would ask all members of this committee to take away is that you're right, this is a question about process, this legislation, but it's important because the government sets the process that helps the economy transition to this new technology.
And I think agriculture, I mean, we've clearly heard that I think agriculture is going to continue to be important. So,
yeah.
To
Sorry,
not have...
Go one final comment. I was on mute. I was saying the time had been reached, but I was on mute. So it's like a tree falling in the forest and nobody hears it.
So I got like 30 seconds.
Yeah, 10 seconds for a comment and then we'll move on, please.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Last but by no means least, Mr. Saini.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to all the witnesses for coming here today. It's been a very interesting conversation. Dr. McLean, I wanted to start with you first because you mentioned something in your opening comments I think that we have not really sort of drilled down on, and that's and we've kind of neglected this aspect of, and that's in terms of the importance of the global refugee crisis. As we've seen in the past, the refugee crisis has created an element of xenophobia and, certain amounts of extremism that's currently plaguing in the Western world. How do you expect, or how do you expect the refugee to look moving forward if we don't achieve net zero?
That's a very good question. I should start by saying my wife is an immigrant, my mother's an immigrant, so you can sort of figure out that I'm pro-immigrant in all of this, pro-immigration on this. So different pathways. I did a study for the Migration Policy Institute in Washington, D.C. last year, and decisions such as this bill here and the greenhouse gas trajectories between now and 2050 change the landscape dramatically. If we actually get to zero emissions globally and nationally by 2050, we can actually reduce the number of people a year that are annually displaced from their homes. Right now, about 21 million people worldwide are displaced each year by floods, storms, droughts, and so on. We can actually reduce that number by hitting zero emissions. Conversely, if we go the way that we're going, we're looking at hundreds of millions of people being displaced. And Canada, as a refugee and migrant receiving nation, will feel pressure from the international community and from source countries of Canadians who are here now, whose family members experience the risks. will be putting pressure on the government to do something. So I think you'll see failure to implement these sorts of bills now. We'll see pressure from sources you may not have expected previously.
The other issue I want to raise, I'm glad you raised that point, because I think that's something we don't really reflect upon in terms of the refugee crisis. But the other aspect of that, and you talked about internal displacement, when we look at certain countries, water is going to be a huge critical issue in terms of, if you look at the Central Asian countries, if you look at Southeast Asia, Iran has a huge water problem. How do you see that impacting global stability?
It's a great concern to people who work in security agencies, both within the Government of Canada, so the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and in the United States and others. They see it as a threat multiplier, is the language they use, is that you already have economic, social, cultural conditions that can create political tensions within countries. And now you want to layer on top of that extreme heat events and water scarcity that affects food supplies and food production around the world, including if there's a drought in Canada. Canada's a food exporting nation. That raises global food prices, and it leads to political instability in countries that import food, like Egypt and others and so on. So it's interconnected. And so that's yet another good reason why we need to take action now to prevent this sort of threat multiplier scenario from emerging.
Thank you very much. And I'll turn my final few moments to Madame Bruyette. I'm aware that your executive director, Madame Catherine Abro, was appointed to the Net Zero Advisory Body. Could you provide some comments and your thoughts of the advisory body, in particularly regarding the value that such a diverse selection of individuals will bring to inform the work our government does?
Thank you for your question. First of all, it's important to distinguish that Catherine sits as an individual. I'm here to represent Climate Action Canada. For many years now, we've been working in this direction. That is, that we recommend that an independent expert committee be implemented. I think it's important to note that the committee that was struck by the government is people who are stakeholders. We want independent experts. I've heard many requests by various panelists here today that industry XYZ be represented. We would advise that we need expertise, scientists, traditional knowledge too, from Indigenous peoples, different social science. It can have information about agriculture and how climate change will affect agriculture. The impact on jobs and all this transition is important. So yes, it's important that there be an independent committee, but the question of scientific expertise could be strengthened on this committee. The last thing I would add is that Catherine certainly has climate expertise, which is different than representation of interests that has financial motivations behind it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Saini. That brings us to the end of this first part of today's meeting. The first panel. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the panelists who made comments that were very interesting. We know that you need a lot of preparation to appear before a committee, and we do appreciate that you took the time to prepare to appear today. We will take a 5-minute break in order to connect the witnesses for the next panel, and I will come back. It's 3:57, so I'll come back at 4 o'clock or 4:03, let's say, and then we can proceed to the next panel. Thank you very much once again to our panelists. As you know, next week we're going to look at amendments to the bill, so your ideas are very interesting with regard to what we'll be discussing next week. So thank you very much, and I'll see the members later. Thank you.
souligner la présence.
So I'd like to point out the presence on this second panel of Mr. Paul Fauteux, Maître Paul Fauteux, who is appearing as an individual. And we also have
Petroleum producers, Shannon Joseph, from the David Suzuki Foundation, Dr. Saba Khan, from the Quebec Environmental Law Center, Geneviève Paul, and from the Transition Accelerator, Professor James Meadowcroft of the School of Public Policy at Carleton University. So I think, I think you all probably all know the format, which is that every group of witnesses gets to make an opening set of opening remarks for 5 minutes, and then we move on to questions. Please keep your mic off when you're not speaking, and address the committee members through the chair, please. So we'll start with Maître Fauteux for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, and thank you for this opportunity to contribute to your work. I served the Government of Canada as a diplomat and senior executive from 1980 to 2010. I was at the Environment Canada Climate Change Bureau and at the UN for the development of the Kyoto Protocol. The bill before you is a step in the right direction, but it is clearly insufficient to meet the urgency of climate change. The improvements that are needed are numerous. I'll mention 6 because of the time constraints. First of all, the title betrays the lack of ambition. If the objective of net zero for 2050 is legitimate, it should not camouflage the current failure of the trajectory of Canadian emissions. The Paris Accord clearly establishes that to achieve net zero by mid-century, we must put a ceiling to emissions globally as soon as possible. Rapid reductions are what Canadians expect from their government, and the ambition should be reflected in the title, which means that the text of the bill should be improved too. Secondly, states that are the leaders in fighting climate change, such as some of our G7 partners and others, are increasingly adopting climate legislation that sets out in the legislation the reduction targets. The general objective of these bills is to make governments responsible for their climate action and avoid repetitive failures, as we have seen in Canada repeatedly. The recent experience of Germany offers us important lessons. C12 should at least include and make obligatory the reduction targets by the Harper administration in 2015. That is 2030 compared to 2005, or the 40 to 45% announced by Prime Minister Trudeau in April. The bill should also provide for interim targets starting in 2025 and then every 5 years. A climate law like C12 that has no targets included is pointless to my mind. Thirdly, C12 does not establish any credible accountability mechanism. The only obligation that it imposes on the minister is to report. In other words, to evaluate his own work. The bill should, on the contrary, provide that the measures planned by the government be examined by an independent authority. This could be the Environment Commissioner, who should become an officer of Parliament to reinforce his independence. Fourthly, C12 provides that a consultative body to provide advice to the minister should fix its own mandate and modify it at any time. Climate urgency and rapid reduction in GES requires, on the contrary, that the experts be mobilized to provide advice on the short-term objectives intermediate targets and 2030 objectives. So the bill must be amended to include the setup of an expert body from academics and research, whose mandate it would be to identify policies that are likely to encourage the reduction of greenhouse gases in Canada. Fifth, the progress report under C12 must take place every 5 years. We have data on emissions every year. In order to evaluate progress or lack thereof toward every interim target, the bill must be amended to ensure that this report be annual. Sixth, C12 does not state that the measures must be evaluated in accordance with their ability to allow Canada to respect its commitments under the Paris Accord. So nothing assures us that the minister's targets will do this. So the bill must be amended to specify that the role of the Environment Commissioner will be to evaluate whether the measures provided for will allow Canada to achieve its targets. And if they are, will respect its commitments under the Paris Accord. In conclusion, a Canadian law worthy of the name should make sure that the public and the international community, that Canada will fulfill its commitments, even if they are insufficient to achieve Paris standards, that is, limiting the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to the pre-industrial levels. In its current form, C12 does not ensure that Canada will meet its climate objectives. In order to do this, the bill must be amended to establish a compulsory target, have interim targets every 5 years as of 2025, have accountability mechanisms, and call upon the necessary expertise. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Mr. Fauteux.
Shannon Joseph from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers.
Thank you very much. So my name is Shannon Joseph, and I'm the Vice President of Government Relations and Indigenous Affairs for the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, or CAP. CAP represents the upstream oil and natural gas industry in Canada, and we would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to appear and be part of your study on C12. This legislation and Canada's work to fulfill its climate commitments are important to all industries and all Canadians. CAP and our member companies are strong supporters and investors in environmental performance and innovation. We want to work with the federal government to achieve its climate change goals. That said, we would highlight for the committee that the pathway to net zero that Bill C12 will set out is also intended to create economic opportunities for Canada. We took note of the Prime Minister's comment, particularly on the occasion of the April 22nd Climate Summit, that our climate change response can be, quote, our greatest economic opportunity. As members can appreciate, you manage what you measure. Hence, the inclusion in this bill of milestone climate change targets towards 2050 performance measurement requirements. And if the path to net zero is to create growth, investment, and jobs, then as a companion to environmental performance, we need economic targets as well as economic performance metrics to be built into this legislation as well. Beyond this, the pathways to net zero are going to look different in diverse regions of our country as we pursue this agenda. And this must also be integrated into the bill in ways that the strategies are developed and evaluated. And this should be done in close collaboration with provincial and territorial governments and their climate change strategies and policies. Canada is an exporting country, and oil and natural gas is our #1 export. We contribute more than $1.1 billion annually to Canada's economy. We employ over 500,000 women and men in well-paying, skilled jobs from coast to coast, including 63,000 jobs in Ontario and 18,000 jobs in Quebec. Our national supply chain outside of Alberta includes over 2,700 different firms with annual purchases of over $4 billion. And in addition, we purchase over $2.4 billion annually from Indigenous-owned businesses, representing about 11% of our procurement in the oil sands. And we are one of the largest employers of Indigenous Canadians and are committed to our important role in reconciliation. And I highlight these points because this industry is an important part of Canada's economic and social fabric. And we have and want to continue to play a role in both supporting Canadian prosperity and helping Canada and the world achieve its environmental objectives. An important way we will play this role is through technology and innovation. One of your other speakers talked about technologies being available, but many still need to be developed. And according to a 2018 study by Global Advantage Consulting Group, conducted for the Clean Resource Innovation Network, or CRIN, about 75% of all clean technology investment in Canada comes from the natural gas and oil industry. Our leadership in innovation will not only help to reduce emissions here at home, but through technology sharing and export, Canada can help reduce global emissions around the world. An example of this is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. The Weyburn Midale project in Saskatchewan is one of the world's largest and longest running. We hope to see more of these projects. Our emerging liquefied natural gas industry in British Columbia also has a role to play in reducing global emissions and in generating internationally traded mitigation outcomes or carbon credits for Canada under the Paris Agreement. China alone is adding one large new coal-fired power plant to its grid every 2 weeks. Coal-fired generation is also continuing to grow in India and Southeast Asia, all with a focus on improving living standards for their citizens. But if these facilities ran on Canadian natural gas, they would generate significantly lower air pollutants and significantly lower GHG emissions, as Ontario experienced when we switched power sources. We cannot afford either environmentally or economically to take a narrow view of what climate change mitigation can look like in Canada. Bill C-12 should articulate the role that economic sectors and other stakeholders will play in the development of plans and in achieving targets. It should ensure that expertise and the technologies and opportunities available to different sectors and regions are brought to bear on Canada's advisory panel and overall decision process. We recommend a greater role for the Governor and Council, and in particular the Minister of Finance, in the development of targets, plans, and supportive policies under the Act, particularly given their potential effects on the whole of the Canadian economy and society. We don't think it is appropriate for that all to rest with one minister. By working together, industry and government can accelerate innovation and develop technologies that reduce emissions while delivering responsibly produced energy to meet global energy demand. And we hope our recommendations to the committee can support Canada in this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Next is Dr. Saba Khan from the David Suzuki Foundation. Dr. Khan.
Chair. Thank you. Dear members, I appreciate the invitation to...
Merci, chers députés. J'apprécie votre invitation à comparaître devant votre comité aujourd'hui. Les lois sur les changements climatiques, comme le projet de loi C12 dont nous sommes saisis aujourd'hui, sont un outil de gouvernance clé dans la quête de l'atteinte d'émissions nettes carboneutres d'ici 2050. Pour être efficace, cette loi...
Yes. I'm getting the French translation through the English channel.
Okay, we'll just stop there for a second, Dr. Khan.
And the French translation's also on the French channel, so.
Oh boy, okay, the wires got to cross
somewhere.
Actually,
we're getting two French channels instead of one English.
Oh, I see. Madam Clerk, if...
The interpreter was on the wrong channel.
Happens from time to time. I don't know why, but... I can barely get my...
We should be good now,
okay.
Sir.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Khan.
Thanks. So national legislative approaches to climate policy have become imperative to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. Not only do they have the potential to reflect authoritative and transparent state commitments that may significantly facilitate and accelerate economy-wide decarbonization by providing predictable cross-sectoral regulatory and investment environments. Canada's climate legislation will not exist in a vacuum. It will form part of an emerging global network of national climate laws. all of which are driven by the common global legal objective to tackle anthropogenic climate change. While no two national climate laws are the same, their frameworks draw on some common key requirements, obligations, and procedures. Our submission to the committee draws on international examples in the area of national climate legislation to inform substantive and procedural amendments to Bill C-12, which would give this draft legislation the specificity, concreteness, transparency, and accountability standards necessary to effectively map, monitor, and reduce Canada's emissions. While Bill C-12 in its current form embodies all core elements common to most climate laws, it falls behind international best practice in several respects. We understand the government's intention is to require science-based targets, but are concerned that as currently drafted, Bill C-12 leaves open the door to sidestep IPCC science and recommendations. In establishing targets and crafting mandatory climate plans, an independent scientific body is mandated to play an advisory role. However, under the current provisions, this body's composition, resources, capacity, and functions remain loosely described. A robust Canadian climate law could trigger the rapid collective transformation that is needed within the public and private sectors in order to mitigate the worst impacts of climate change, strengthen adaptation efforts, and enhance resilience across the country. Climate legislation should foster greater public transparency, ensure government accountability, and provide a clear, quantifiable, and practical vision of how Canada intends to reduce economy-wide GHG emissions. A robust legal framework for climate change can guarantee a leading role for independent science in determining Canada's climate ambition and ensure that this ambition never regresses. It can also ensure that Canada's plans of action to achieve periodical emissions reductions targets on the path to net zero do not deviate from the latest scientific recommendations of the IPCC. Some climate laws go so far as to call for the explicit alignment between federal budget policy and climate policy, assign emissions reduction obligations for certain sectors to specific ministries, and even mandate the government to produce a global climate strategy related to imported goods, bilateral cooperation, and international climate finance. In the best cases, climate laws mandate independent scientific bodies to play a strong role in advising and monitoring government actions on climate change, and oblige the government to respond publicly to their advice, recommendations, and reports. These mechanisms ensure that climate policymaking is not led by electoral cycles, but by the long-term objective of net zero emissions by 2050. We have before us today an opportunity to ensure the passing of robust climate legislation, which would propel us securely and collectively into the era of economy-wide decarbonization. It is essential that our climate legislation bind the relationships between climate science, government action, and public engagement if it is to make a meaningful contribution to achieving net zero by 2050 and the end-of-century objective of the Paris Agreement. In order for Bill C-12 to become a catalyzing force for change, target setting, plan rollouts, reporting obligations, monitoring procedures, and the accountability framework must be significantly strengthened. The issue of offsets should also be clearly addressed. In this respect, the David Suzuki Foundation supports the amendments recommended by EcoJustice and West Coast Environmental Law to the committee on Monday, which would help bring C-12 up to the international standard of the Paris Agreement in terms of accounting for anthropogenic emissions and removals in a manner that promotes environmental integrity, transparency, accuracy, completeness, comparability, and consistency. I strongly encourage members to work to strengthen the bill in line with international best practice and to approve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. We'll go now to le Centre québécois du droit de l'environnement.
So we'll go on to the Centre québécois du droit de l'environnement. Geneviève Paul, who's the Executive Director of the Quebec Environmental Law Center. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank members of the committee for this invitation to testify. The adoption of a climate bill is urgent and necessary, and we welcome the introduction of this bill. However, in order for the law to have the means to achieve its ambitions, we believe that the bill must be improved. For now, the bill would give us an essential map. We propose to add a compass and the necessary landmarks so that we do not get lost and arrive at our destination. So here are 5 main recommendations. First, we believe it is essential to make the advisory body independent and not make it multi-party, but independent and competent with the necessary expertise. which the current provisions do not guarantee. We must, as Quebec has just done for its Advisory Committee on Climate Change, draw inspiration from the best international practices that have proven themselves. We therefore propose that the selection process be independent. Members could be recommended by a diverse selection committee and appointed by the Council of Ministers, including Indigenous peoples. It must be independent and not have any relations or interests that may harm the mission of the committee. This is required in Quebec. We strongly recommend that scientists be in the majority on the advisory body, as is the case, for example, in France, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, and Quebec. We propose that its mandate be clarified and expanded, and that it not be subject to the discretion of the Minister of the Environment, as is currently the case. For example, the body should be consulted on major issues, such as setting carbon budgets and interim targets. To ensure that science guides our actions on climate, we suggest that the agency be able to issue advice to all government entities. These advisories should be issued and made public. The annual report should be submitted to Parliament, not the Minister. To improve Section 22.2, which is already a step in the right direction, we propose that the Minister of the Environment and any other minister who decides to disregard scientific advice from the advisory body be required to justify why, as is done right now in the UK. Because the issues are so important and rapidly evolve, the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development should report every 2 years rather than every 5. To support the administration in this not-so-simple task, we propose to impose a climate analysis grid determined by the advisory body. This grid would make it possible to evaluate the decisions of the government and the administration in light of their climate impacts and impacts on the achievement of targets in order to ensure the coherence of the actions of the entire state apparatus. In addition to a strong advisory body, the bill must also provide for interim targets and 5-year federal carbon budgets. The bill mentions that we wish to respect international to do so, the law should refer directly to the Paris Agreement's flagship standards by setting normative benchmarks for GHG emissions and providing milestone targets as early as 2025 and not 2030. Finally, the law should include an obligation of result to ensure compliance with the targets. Because it's simple, we simply cannot afford to miss the targets we set ourselves. We have catching up to do. There is requirements or a will to improve the bill. We hope this will be reflected in the amendments. Last but not least, public participation. The bill falls short of Canada's international obligations for rights related to participation in public affairs. The public must have an opportunity to provide its observations. There should be an obligation to consult the provinces and mechanisms to educate the public. We need everyone if we want to overcome the climate crisis. The Minister of the Environment stated this week that saving the planet is not a political issue. It simply comes down to whether or not we believe the science. Our proposals aim to place science at the heart of the bill, while ensuring that the necessary guidelines are put in place to truly address the crisis. This is in the interest of all of us, and we are counting on both houses to do so. We have submitted proposed amendments in the appendix to our brief and remain available to accompany the legislator so that we can respond adequately to the greatest threat currently facing humanity. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Ball. And lastly, we have with us Professor James Meadowcroft.
Le nom de l'organisme.
The name of the organization is Transition Accelerator.
Croft, you have 5 minutes to make opening remarks. Professor? You're on mute.
Yeah.
Okay.
J'ai dit en français, c'est l'accélérateur de transition.
I said it in French. It's the accélérateur de transition in French.
Yes, I'm from the Transition Accelerator, which is a national non-profit nonprofit organization that is focused on building transition pathways in regions and sectors across Canada. We issued a recent report called Pathways to Net Zero, a decision support tool, which we will send to the committee, and I would urge you to look at. It goes in quite a lot of detail about concrete steps in different sectors in order to move towards net zero. I'm going to talk about a few of the high-level findings of this report. I am not proposing particular amendments to this piece of legislation. I'm sure that the members have a whole series of propositions before you. Really, my comments are focused more on the background and how we should understand net zero. So the first thing I want to say is that net zero, from our point of view, changes everything. Once it is formally adopted as a goal, it changes the way the climate problem is framed. So net zero means balancing any residual emissions with removals. And since most of the negative emissions technologies are highly uncertain as to outcome, permanence, and cost, what that really means is driving down emissions towards actual zero in all sectors of the economy. So why does it change everything? Essentially because it means that the climate issue is no longer about reducing emissions by a certain percentage by a certain point, but simply about stopping producing greenhouse gases. And that's to say, absolutely squeezing them out of the economy. So for years, our argument has been, how do we find low-cost emissions to get to X%? Forget that. What we need is new systems which simply don't emit greenhouse gases. So the only way to get rid of these GHGs is that the large social systems of provisioning, so transport, how we move goods, how we move people, how agri-food system works, have to go towards net zero. And that means large-scale changes to those systems. Those systems, however, are already changing from all sorts of disruptive currents. Think about autonomous cars that are pushing the boundaries of what transport systems will look like. So the task is not to kind of get rid of some emissions from the way we're doing things now, but to engineer new systems which will be better in many respects and also low carbon. So this means the electricity system, how we build buildings, transport, agri-food have to go through major changes. So some of the implications of thinking about it this way is that the focus should be on sectors and regions. Why? Because the problems in agri-food are not the same as the problems in buildings or transport, and one policy instrument cannot drive these change. There are different obstacles, different enabling factors, and the same goes when we think about Canada's regional identity and different regional political economies. So pathways will be regional and sectoral. We also need to think about what the system looks like when we get to net zero and plan in function of that. And this will allow us to avoid some dead-end pathways. And an example I'll give you is blending ethanol with gasoline, which Canada has proudly been doing for more than a decade, and is not advancing us towards net zero, even though it may secure some incremental reductions, because the world is headed towards an electrified personal vehicle transport system. Industry has already opted that way, and there's not enough land anyway to create biofuels everywhere. So what we need is analysis that looks at what these pathways are to net zero at the system level, not sets of policies that encourage incremental emissions where they look fanciful or where they look promising, if you like, because we will waste enormous amounts of investment building infrastructure, which turns out to be useless a decade later because it isn't actually on a pathway to zero. I guess the last thing I would say is it's great that Canada is moving towards a net zero understanding of the climate problem. But what we really need is a strategic vision now about what pathways are that will get us there. For a long time, the tendency is to do a little bit of everything, to finance this and finance that. There are a few big things that make a difference and that we should be putting as much investment into as possible. So electrifying personal transport, decarbonizing buildings, driving carbon, the remaining carbon out of the electricity system. These things are big. We have the technologies. We know how to do them now. Other things like aircraft emissions, many other things are important and will have to be done, but are not the priority now. There we need R&D and we need experiments to identify solutions that can be rolled out at scale.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Professor Meadowcroft. Very interesting. So we'll go to our first round of questioning, the 6-minute round. I believe for the Conservatives, it's Mr. Generou, but correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, Mr. Generou, go ahead.
Yes, you are correct, Mr. Chair. And thank you, panelists. I don't know about you, Mr. Chair, but I have yet to hear a panelist who says they like this bill. It seems to be across the board. I guess maybe the minister. The minister liked the bill. Outside of that, it seems to be everybody is pointing out what appear to be flaws with the bill. That being said, I want to, I guess, address most of my questions to Cap and Ms. Joseph. Thanks for your presentation. In your remarks, you mentioned the lack of economic targets and the lack of accountability. Hoping you can expand on some of that. But the question for you is, would you then agree that there needs to be a tracking system for those economic targets?
Thanks very much for the question. And so yes, when we first saw this bill, one of the things we thought was, well, where is the economic aspect of this? Because we know that the environment and the economy need to go together and need to be thought of together. And so we put forward amendments that were really about integrating those goals, looking at an economic target that goes alongside what we're trying to achieve with net zero. Specifically, we think that if the goal is to create new jobs, et cetera, we should be measuring, are those jobs being created? How does that look regionally, nationally? Are we attracting investment? How is that looking regionally, nationally? Is our real GDP increasing? How is that looking regionally, nationally? Because ultimately, the health of the economy and these investments are what's going to be needed by industries, not just ours, but manufacturing and others, to do the type of innovation that's needed. And if the government is only measuring its performance based on emissions reductions and not looking at this other side of the equation, it's going to potentially pursue solutions that are inefficient, that cause problems they didn't intend. And if you look at them both together, you're going to find optimal solutions. And especially when you put that regional lens, you're going to find optimal solutions. And we think having that built into the legislation in terms of the targets, in terms of the reporting, is critical.
Right, and you touched on some of that regional piece, and I hope you can expand a bit on that about the provincial and territorial roles. I think a major issue has not just in this bill, but in multiple pieces of legislation with this government has been not respecting those jurisdictions and introducing redundant regulations instead of that collaborative piece with other provinces. Is there any piece here in C12 that you would find redundant when it comes to the other provinces and territories?
Sorry, I muted myself. I think the issue is just a lack of consideration. So there is nothing in the bill that requires the federal government and its planning process to explicitly take into account the measures that provincial and territorial governments are taking and how their measures interact with federal measures. We think that's very important. Our companies operate in multiple jurisdictions across the country. When we look at our experience with a policy like methane regulation, we're happy today that we have in British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan equivalency agreements with the federal government. But before we had those agreements, we were very concerned about double management of the same molecules of CO2 and how that was going to work, the costs it would impose, and then what that would mean in terms of our abilities to operate, innovate, to employ people. And so there are consequences to operating without consideration of these policies. And the more The bill reflects that those other policies being implemented provincially must be considered by the federal government. I think the more we can avoid double policy and inefficiency.
Great, and I think that'll be helpful in terms of potential amendments to the bill. To Ms. Joseph, and just wanted, with my last, I guess, probably a minute here before the chair jumps in, you touch a little bit on the panel, and just out of curiosity, we've had other testimony that says there shouldn't be any industry involvement on the panel at all. Just curious as to what the perspective of CAP would be when it comes to the composition of the panel.
Well, I think it would be unfortunate if the panel does not include expertise of the people who know how to do things. To some of the comments made earlier by other panelists, cement making, steel making, oil and gas, mining, for all of these industries take very specific expertise. They're highly technological. So you can't just have a committee of climate scientists deciding what the pathway to net zero is. You need all these other experts. And I'll speak about the business sector experts, and I agree there needs to be other types who can speak to what are the best technologies right now, what are the opportunities regionally based on energy mixes available, and how do we pursue those to get our emission reduction goals, but to do that in a way that still preserves the ability of companies to be healthy and to continue to operate. And so we think that's critically important. And we think what would help in that is ensuring that there is a role for cabinet in deciding the terms of reference of these groups and of this group and who sits there, and certainly in defining in the Act the role that those sectors will play, especially when there are sector-related plans established under this legislation.
Thank you. Thank you. So is it Mr. Baker for the Liberal side? Am I correct?
Sounds good to me, Chair.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thanks very much. So thank you all to all the witnesses. Merci à tous les témoins d'être ici aujourd'hui.
Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I'd like to put questions to everyone, but unfortunately I won't have time to do that. So I hope you will understand.
I would like to ask, so Mr. Generou sort of has on multiple occasions today suggested that nobody likes this bill. I kind of see this process as the process that legislation should go through, which is one where the government puts forward a proposal and then people provide their input to make it better. So I don't. That's not how I've read the room. But I kind of want to recanvass the room because I want to make sure that I understand where you're all at. So I won't be able to ask all of you because it'll take too long. But Monsieur Fauteux, are you opposed to this bill passing?
Absolument pas.
Absolutely not. As I said at the outset, this bill is a step in the right direction. In my opinion, and in that of other interveners, it's insufficient. It needs to be improved. It's not a bad bill, but it has to be made better. Thank you. Mr. Fauteux, do you think that it's urgent that this bill be adopted? With or without amendment, is it urgent to pass a bill like this? Well, I believe that the amendments that are necessary are sufficiently important that you have to take the time to debate them. It's a bad idea to do this in a rush. There is a climate emergency, but the UK came up with legislation in 2008 to address this. Canada is dragging behind. It's one of the dunces in the class in the G7 when it comes to climate leadership. So we have a lot of catching up to do, but it'll be our first climate bill. This will be put in place for the next few decades, so let's take the time to implement it properly. So am I to understand you're saying is it's urgent, but it's urgent to do it right? Yes, exactly. Exactly. Okay. I'd like to go to Ms. Paul now. The same questions. Are you opposed to the adoption of this bill? Thank you, Mr. Baker. We're not at all opposed to the adoption of this bill. Our answer would be the same one as Mr. Fauteux. This is a necessary bill. We need legislative framework to address the climate urgency, but if we're going to do anything, we have to do it right. It's our role to make proposals. As Mr. Fauteux said, there are very clear amendments that are based on proven practices. That's useful. We may be dragging behind, but we have to look at other jurisdictions that have tested these mechanisms. And these amendment proposals are within the government's reach. They can include those amendments in the current bill. And I agree. It is urgent, but it's urgent to adopt a good bill to correct things. I understand what you're saying. As a member of Parliament, honestly, I think that all members here, probably everyone in the House of Commons, has a different definition of what a good bill is when it comes to the battle against climate change. But what we're here for today is to listen to your opinions. You're the experts. You have very diversified experience and points of view, a little different too, but it's important for us to hear you and make changes to the bill so that it's the best bill possible. That's my opinion anyway. Ms. Paul, if I can get back to you. There are people such as my constituents and other Canadians across Canada who are looking at us and listening to us on television right now. So could you describe, I think I have about a minute and a half left. Could you describe why it's urgent that a good bill be adopted? Yes. Well, it's urgent for many reasons, but mainly because we're going to pay a very high price in Canada. All Canadians will suffer by the lack of action on the climate front, not to mention the impact that this could have internationally. So it's our obligation, our responsibility as Canadians, as a government, to have framework legislation on climate. What's a good piece of legislation? Well, it's one that has parameters to reach our goals. What's interesting is that you have many experts, and there's a convergence here about what to add in the bill in order to achieve what we want. The impact on our rights, fundamental rights, are so important. You had experts that testified about that. This is the biggest threat to humanity, the biggest threat to the protection of human rights, too. And that was the opinion of the UN Commissioner on Human Rights. So I think we don't need to demonstrate how urgent it is to act in order to benefit everyone, including all the sectors of the economy. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, Ms. Michaud next. Ms. Posey. Oh, I see. Okay, you're confusing me now. It's a stratagem, isn't it? Okay, go ahead, Ms. Posey. Well, I also want to thank all our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Meadowcroft stated that we'd had a lot of ideas for amendments. So my first question would be for Maître Fauteux. It's the second time you appear before the committee. In your opening statement, you talked about the experience of climate legislation in other countries. You pointed out the UK. Could you cite a few others? Not all, because I have other questions for you too. Yes, of course. Well, I talked about Great Britain a little. Maybe I could talk about Germany. Germany was in the news recently. They had climate legislation for many years now that included a specific target, as I was recommending for C12. And that piece of legislation was invalidated by the Constitutional Court because it didn't go far enough, because it did not provide for enough. It only had emission targets until 2030. That's the day after tomorrow from a geological standpoint. So what the Constitutional Court in Germany said, and this comes to what Ms. Paul was talking about, there's the Human Rights Act aspect. It's because of human rights that the German law was invalidated, because it forced future generations to carry this disproportionate burden. In other words, there's a huge, as Professor Meadowcroft indicated, we have to change everything. Zero net emissions or net zero emissions by the middle of the century requires a radical transformation. There's an effort to be made, and that effort has to be fairly distributed among various generations. We can't say we'll do a little bit and our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be stuck with the problem. The law was invalidated for that reason, and a new piece of legislation was adopted by the German cabinet and will be adopted by their parliament next month. So there's progress there. Very interesting indeed. When you came to see us last March, I believe, the Environment Commissioner was supposed to become an independent officer of Parliament. That's not the case. There doesn't seem to be political will to do that. You have vast experience in government service. So can you tell us whether C12 has some kind of role for the Commissioner, a consultative role? Shouldn't there be something, some link between the two? Couldn't there be cooperation between the Commissioner and the organization? Yes, of course. As I mentioned earlier, the important thing is independence. So if the Commissioner became an officer of Parliament, his independence would be strengthened. Ms. Paul talked about the need for giving the advisory board or body under C12 some independence it doesn't have. Right now, the minister appoints people, describes the mandate, can change the mandate whenever he wants. So independence is essential. As Ms. Joseph was saying, representatives of industry must contribute. Some of them have expertise, but that expertise can be brought together in an independent committee where there's a majority of scientists with some participation by industry. Thank you very much, Mr. Fauteur. It's always very interesting to talk to you. So I'd like to continue in the same vein with Ms. Paul. Ms. Paul, many observers would like to participate in this committee, people from the plastics industry, farmers, what have you. In your opinion, Ms. Paul, is enshrining the functions of the advisory body, including criteria for membership of the committee. Does that all have to be in the bill? Thank you for your question, Ms. Posey. Absolutely. I think it's essential to set out in the legislation what the mandate of the committee is, the selection criteria, the expertise required. There's a proposal we made in amending 21.2, which is inspired by other climate legislation elsewhere in the world. It's important not to make this subject to the discretionary power of the minister. And that's what worries me, given what we've heard. We have to avoid the trap of a multi-party or a system with different parties that are stakeholders. We all agree that climate change is a concern, but we have proposed amendments to increase public participation. It's important to hear the voices of everyone, including industry, because we need to all move forward together if we're going to achieve this. There are ways to do this, different ways we can do things to increase the participation of various stakeholders and members of the public. But we must avoid the trap that this consultative body be made up of stakeholders that have an interest. Science has to guide decisions, otherwise we'll end up in the same situation. We haven't listened to science enough. That's one of the keys to success of any legislation that we have seen adopted in the past 10 years, roughly, and in the last year. So it's essential that the legislation set out that the committee must be independent and be a majority of scientists, multidisciplinary. Thank you. Mr. Bacharach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to begin with a couple of questions for Ms. Paul on the topic of the advisory body. I'm curious if you know how other jurisdictions that have similar advisory bodies that focus more on scientific credentials, how they define those scientific credentials. Are you aware of any of the approaches that they utilize? It seems to me to be a tricky thing to put your finger on. What is a scientist and how much of a scientist does someone have to be?
Thank you, Mr. Backrath, for this excellent question. And I think, yes, we can build on some of the best practices that we have been looking at in other jurisdictions. And I would say that there are two, perhaps more, but at least two main criteria that we can look at and that we should include in the legislation. And the first one is actually the criteria of independence. And how do we define that? I've made an allusion to that in our introductory remarks. One of the ways to do that is to make sure that the person holding the mandate does not have any interests that could affect her or his ability to fulfill the mandate. And when we start looking at that, it reduces the number of possible candidates quite quickly, to be frank. But then we come down to really making sure that the person would be independent, would make recommendations addressed to all political parties with a view to putting science first. And the second criteria would be, and we've made a recommendation, an amendment suggestion in that regard based on what we've seen in other jurisdictions, and it's one where we list actually some of the disciplines that should be part of the committee. Of course, the first one that comes to mind is climate change science, but we've also seen that it's quite interesting to make sure that we have people that are able to assess the different impacts in terms of vulnerable populations and regions that climate change have and will continue to have, for instance, and also, of course, public policy, for instance, also social science as well, but mostly, of course, with the climate science in mind. I hope that answers your question.
I appreciate your response. Moving on to Mr. Fautou, I found your remarks at the beginning very interesting, and I believe you have an interesting view on this challenge, having worked within government for so long and having watched, our various stumblings over the years. Could you describe briefly what has gone wrong? Like, what have the key failings and the problematic behaviors within successive federal governments been that have led us to such dismal results on the climate front?
Thank you for that very important question, which calls for a brutally frank answer. Ms. Joseph spoke of the importance of the Canadian oil and gas and coal industry. Coal less so, oil and gas more so. That's the reason. Canada is a petro state. Canada exports fossil fuels. Fossil fuels generate an enormous amount of economic activity. And so Canada's climate policy has had, in effect, in reality, as a main objective, the protection of Canada's oil and gas industry. It has not been truly designed to protect the climate. The proof of that is that after all these years of climate policy, emissions keep going up. Emissions from oil and gas in particular keep going up. We talk about carbon capture and storage. We have a wonderful demonstration project in Weyburn, Saskatchewan. It is a world leader of this technology. But as Professor, and I'm sorry, his name is escaping me, who spoke earlier, this technology is completely unreliable in terms of effectively sequestering carbon at an acceptable cost at scale in order to meet the needs of the climate emergency. So the professor was quite right. We need a radical change, but that in a nutshell is why Canadian climate policy has failed, because its real objective was not to protect the climate, but to protect the oil and gas industry.
Thank you for that response, Mr. Fotu. Is the current bill enforceable? To what degree can C12, if we amend it, we make it stronger, to what degree can it account for some of those factors, the intrinsic factors within our governance structures that seem to undermine our efforts? How effective is this as an accountability measure?
Currently, it's not, but it can be made so. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Canada is about to finally adopt a climate law. It has never done so, and I can bet you it's not going to do so for a very long time. These things are meant to last. These things, as Madame Paul was saying, you put a framework for the transition. We need an energy transition like the world has never known. The International Atomic Energy Agency, which works under the aegis of the OECD, just put out a report a few days ago on the path to net zero. Our professor was talking about that path. That path to net zero requires that oil and gas that is not in production now never come into production. The only way in which the world, including Canada, can get to net zero is if all the planned increase in production of oil and gas is shelved. Let's keep production at the current level, but that is one way in which this law can be a turning point. It has the potential to become so.
Thank you. We'll go to our second round, and I have Ms. McLeod kicking off the second round, which is a 5-minute round.
Thank you, Chair. And again, thank you to the witnesses and the really important dialogue that we're having. I'm going to make an observation and then I'll ask my question. I mean, Mr. Baker, who is on the government side, talked about the importance of this process to make legislation better. There's been significant discussion about what the panel should look like. And so I do want to note that, you know, the government did not wait to listen to the important reflections in terms of what this panel should look like and have, you know, appointed, and so of course have diminished our opportunities to, you know, influence. And again, I think we have some good dialogue going there. You know, I think I want to go, you know, we just had a comment made about our oil and gas sector. And I'm going to use an example first, and then I'll perhaps go to Ms. Joseph. You know, we had this plastic where the government banned 6 plastics, but they didn't do any sort of, you ask them, you know, what companies in Canada produce plastics? What's the impact going to be? Do we import? You know, where do we get our straws from? And they hadn't done any of the analysis. So important, you know, I think many of us agree it's important. But the analysis of the impact is also important. So Ms. Joseph talked about an economic analysis. I've had many witnesses that have said, as we make this transition, we're going to have lots of jobs. We're just going to have different jobs. So I don't know what the fear would be about having an economic analysis that looks at that as part of this particular piece of legislation. We've talked about other sort of benchmarks. So I would open it up again, both to sort of perhaps comment in terms of some of the things that have been said for oil and gas, but also the importance of an economic analysis. If this transition creates more jobs, we should be transparent about it. So if you could go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. So first I'd say I think that it's absolutely critical for us to have an economic lens on the way we pursue net zero and what it costs, what it changes for affordability of all aspects of the economy. You don't hear that spoken about in the IEA's report, and we haven't heard that from some of the other witnesses, but it is important for people, it's important for businesses, and it needs to be part of how we assess the pathways that we're on. You know, in terms of the contribution of the oil and gas industry to emissions, our emissions intensity has gone down by 21%, and our operational changes can bring it down further. Part of the challenge is the demand for energy here and around the world. The cars that are driven, the planes that are flown, the factories that need our energy, the population that goes up and that increases that total demand. And whether that demand is met by Canada or by Saudi Arabia makes a difference because of how we produce our energy and the commitments that our companies have to how they produce that energy. So I think it's disingenuous to blame our not meeting certain targets just on one sector.
Sorry, keep going. Thank you.
No, please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah. So when you're asking for some economic analysis, that's not to diminish the importance of, Canada working towards, their goals in terms of emissions.
Not at all. Canada has to pursue its international commitments, and all industries, including mine, are committed to it. My members are some of the top producers of hydrogen. We are looking seriously at all types of technologies, all forms of energy, as we look at our own operations and the way that those things will transform over time. But in order for these things to happen, in order for us to deploy large-scale changes, we need to be able to attract investment. That means policies need to be designed in such a way that investing in innovation remains cost effective. And if those policies are not designed with economics in mind, and if we don't measure that the economic outcomes we want to see happen as we transition to net zero, there will be negative consequences as well, and public resistance and other issues. And so we have to advance these things together. And I think we've heard similar things from other witnesses, but I think that's the key point behind our amendments.
Chair, have I got some time still?
You have 25 seconds for a comment, I guess.
I mean, of course, what we're mostly focused on today, of course, has been the diminishing of emissions. But what we haven't also talked about is the other side of the equation, which is, of course, planting the trees, recovering with the grasslands. And so I hope at some point we have those conversations also, because there is a few sides to the equation. Thanks.
Thank you. Is it Ms. Sachs? Is Ms. Sachs next on the Liberal side?
It is, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I want to thank all of our witnesses. This has been a very fulsome conversation, and I'm learning a lot, so I appreciate that. I'd like to actually start with Dr. Khan, if I may. There was Ms. Paul earlier talked really in detail about the legislative issues that we're looking at in terms of amendments. But what's missing for me in this discussion right now is what's the importance of consulting Indigenous Canadians and taking Indigenous knowledge into account in fighting climate change. We've talked a lot about the nuts and bolts of these pieces, but they are a key stakeholder in this conversation, and I'd like some insight from you if I can, Dr. Khan.
Thank you. I would say that I'm not in the place to speak for Indigenous peoples communities at this moment, but I would say that Canada has it has ratified the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Rights, on the Indigenous peoples' rights, and I do think that those rights have to be upheld in the implementation of Bill C-12.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to move to Ms. Paul, if I may. So we've heard quite a number of concerns about the advisory body being formed before C-12 has been passed, and I'm a bit confused about that. That there seems to be some hesitation to act by some of the sides, even just forming an advisory body when we've already set the 2030 and 2050 targets. To me, it seems that C-12 is codifying in law what we're already trying to do to ensure that the government changes, and that a new government can't ignore the issue, which has been made very clear by all of you that this is pivotal legislation for this time. So then it would make sense to me that we'd establish formal requirements in the advisory body, like reporting requirements in C-12. So isn't it reasonable that we should be formalizing a body into the law now, even if amendments to it might be needed?
Merci, Madame Sachs. Je vais vous répondre en français si ça vous...
Thank you. I will answer in French if you'll allow me. I think, to echo a comment made by Ms. McLeod, it's not too late to change what exists and to make sure that we have a committee that is independent, that is science-based, be it through an existing vehicle, as long as it's specified in the legislation, and then we can adjust the terms of reference of the committee. I think that some mandates are short enough to make sure that we have scientific experts who form a majority of the community. Here at our organization, we propose an advisory body that recommends appointments to the Governor and Council for the makeup of this independent committee. I understand that there is an existing committee right now. In our opinion, it is very competent in terms of their individual expertise, but they do not meet the mandate and disciplines necessary that should guide the work of such a committee in the advice it provides to the government to make sure that it's science-based, that it's at the heart of the decisions made and the advice given. It's not incompatible at this stage to strengthen the structure of the committee in law and then modify the advisory body terms of reference accordingly.
Thank you, Ms. Paul. And I'm going to shift gears a little bit, if I may, because all of this legislation is happening so that fundamentally we know as humanity and as Canadians, we are creatures of habit and change is hard. And we know that reaching net zero will require a tremendous amount of change and effort from industry, being guided by science, and also really with a nod to what we produce, how we consume it, how we use it, and how we dispose of it. So I'd like to switch to Professor Meadowcroft, if I may. We haven't had a chance to hear from you. So where do you see Canada making strides to achieve net zero in terms of where should we be focusing our efforts for essentially getting the best bang for our buck?
You have about 45 seconds, Professor Meadowcroft.
Wow. No pressure.
Thanks for the question. I think people should think about the economic opportunities for net zero. I think, let me take the automotive sector as an example. Gasoline sales have peaked in North America. This is a declining industry. We need to be building EVs and autonomous vehicles and developing the technologies of the future. There's huge potential here. If we wait 5 years, we'll be buying everything from China and from the US. The question is, we've got to get ahead of these changes. The key things now are transport, buildings, decarbonizing the electricity sector. Yeah, that's like really fast, our bangs for the buck. And there are emerging technologies like hydrogen, where we could also, if we act quickly, play an important role. One of the other panelists mentioned that we produce lots of hydrogen. Yeah, it's dirty gray hydrogen, mostly, except for the project that used to be called ShellQuest. Blue hydrogen could play a role as well as green hydrogen, but it should not be focused on just dealing with the emissions of the present oil and gas extraction, but for building a net zero economy of the future.
Thank you. Madame Posey.
Ms. Posey. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to get back to Ms. Paul. Earlier, it was said that attaining net zero as fast as possible means intergenerational fairness. To your mind, in the current bill, is there anything that allows us to make sure that this will be sustainable, that the measures that are voted on will be for the future, regardless of any government change? I only have 2.5 minutes, and I have another question after. Fine. Thank you, Ms. Posey. I think that the various amendments we've proposed, as did others around the table, seek to strengthen accountability and would allow us to make sure that we stop postponing everything until future generations take over. Mr. Fauteux was talking about Germany. Their decision reminds the government they can't just postpone this. There are very difficult issues at stake. So there's accountability for forcing the government to justify itself when it sets aside science. That would be a way to answer the young. Why are you adopting such and such a trajectory, in addition to have interim targets? Stop delaying things and report to all of Parliament. These are tools that would really respect intergenerational fairness. Very Interesting. Thank you. Ms. Can, many organizations such as yours welcome Bill C-12 but would like to see amendments. You talked about a giant step. I think it takes a leap because we really have to move fast. We're in a climate crisis. But in your opinion, while Canada's emissions seem to, apparently, the government wants 40 to 45% reduction, what do you feel would be the most important measure to enshrine in C-12? Thank you for your question, Ms. Posey. I think that generally speaking, if we look at this legislation, all the elements are there. What's really important is to enshrine a target that's really science-based. As I said earlier, we support the suggestion made by other NGOs, and we support a 60% target by 2030. Generally speaking, I think that what's really important and that we don't see in the bill till now is this link that this target be science-based. That's imperative. Otherwise, there is no chance that the necessary action will be taken in the right scope to truly achieve our objective of net zero by 2050. It's also very interesting because earlier we were talking about the dichotomy between the economy and the environment. I must say this is a false dichotomy. We saw the federal budget. We saw a climate perspective that is now integrated in the budget. We also see a climate analysis about quality of life. So I think it's very interesting to approach C-12 the same way. Thank you very much. Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps staying with Ms. Khan, the question of how we make Bill C-12 work within Canada's federalism has come up several times, and I believe in this meeting we've heard a bit about the role of the provinces vis-a-vis the federal government. How do you see that that aspect of this work, and how can Bill C-12 adequately address the provincial climate plans?
Interesting question. So federalism is not only a challenge for Canada. Germany is a federation within the EU, which is also a complex challenge. This is a framework law. So we're not looking at, it doesn't prescribe policy. What it does is lay down a foundation, a process, so the government can organize its transition, its inevitable transition towards decarbonization. We have in Canada a model of cooperative federalism. We have Supreme Court judgments that have carefully laid out that, through legal doctrines, the pith and substance of legislation really determines, its constitutionality. There are always incidental effects on different jurisdictions. It's inevitable, but we have a long history. Back in 1887, the Privy Council ruled that a provincial tax on banks was in fact constitutional because it didn't try to regulate banks. It was simply trying to raise revenue for the provinces. So I think that we have to take into consideration that every national law is adopted within a certain legal culture. We have a strong legal culture of cooperative federalism in Canada that can ensure that there is a spirit of cooperation. During COVID, we saw a Team Canada approach. We saw federal discretionary transfers to the provinces. So we know that, in fact, the federal government and provinces can cooperate very, very tightly when it comes to public health crises. And this is the public health crisis of our lifetime.
I very much agree. I think the direction of my question was thinking about the fact that we've seen some provinces carve out space as real leaders on climate, and we've seen other provinces do much less and even move in the wrong direction. How does the federal government handle the divergence of approaches provincially within the context of this bill?
So as I mentioned, this bill is about process, it's about transparency, it's about going towards a certain goal. When Canada reports to the UNFCCC in its national inventory, it includes provincial emissions, it includes territorial emissions, it includes sectoral breakdowns. That's no different when it comes to Bill C-12. With this legislation, we're not telling the provinces what to do. We're creating a transparency over what those emissions are. And, that's in the spirit of democracy, transparency, accountability, and it can allow transparency itself is not an infringement on the constitutional division of powers.
Thank you. Interesting perspective. Mr. Albus for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. Canada is great because we can have a diversity of views and ask respectful questions and then engage on what best paths for our country in the short and long term. So appreciate everyone's views. Ms. Khan, I'm going to continue on down the vein that Mr. Bachrach had just gone. You did talk about cooperative federalism. You did talk about how important transparency is. Would you believe that, because right now the minister has the choice of that he may comment on provincial undertakings, but that kind of leaves an open book for a future government to polarize and only report on actions it likes or actions it doesn't like. Do you believe that there should be a summary of provincial actions so that the Canadian public can look in one document as to what is happening right across our country?
I absolutely do think that we need to see where the emissions are coming from, and that transparency has to be clear. And there's no other way around it. It will help each province take the steps that it needs to take in order to make its contribution towards the net zero goal.
Ms. Khan, I was also listening to your opening comments, and you particularly mentioned the need for public transparency, independent science, and also climate resiliency. And so when I meet with environmental stakeholders, I hear more and more about nature-based climate solutions. Actually, the COP26 is going to be focusing on this. And right now, this particular bill is completely silent when it comes to non-anthropogenic emissions as well as sequestration. Do you believe that we can do a better job by including in the bill a provision that would require a report outlining the non-anthropogenic emissions as well as sequestration?
I think that when it comes to the concept of sequestration or even we can't answer this question without addressing offsets. The bill is silent on carbon offsets, and there's an opportunity there. I mean, if we wanted to be really clear and transparent on what our emissions are, then we have to address the issue of offsets. French law explicitly excludes offsets. The guiding principle under Danish law is real domestic reductions. German law explicitly allows intra-EU trading. So I think that we have to include provisions that stipulate limited use or exclusion of offsets. And then, in that context, we can also take into consideration the non-anthropogenic emissions.
Yeah, what I think I'm more discussing, though, is the state of, let's say, Canada's forests and its other nature-based inventory. And because many of those are either Crown land or under direct policy control of governments. So that's really what I'm getting at is not necessarily offsets, but just the state of nature in Canada. We're the second largest landmass. I'm going to go just to Professor Meadowcroft just briefly. Sir, you mentioned electrification, particularly when it comes to transportation. Again, this bill is silent on electrification. While individual provinces do decide what policies they'll pursue towards on the electrical grid, I think we all can agree that there's a growing role, particularly around electric vehicles and the changing, the greening of our grid. Do you not agree that there should be some sort of summary as to the state of Canada's electrical grid so that the public knowledge of this can be improved?
So I'm slightly hesitant to want to prescribe in too much detail what the exact report headings under which reporting should be done in this legislation as it goes forward. But I completely agree with your substantive point that the state of Canada's electric grid is a critical issue. Canada has coasted for quite a bit on the fact that we have a kind of 80% decarbonized grid, and that's great, and it's the envy of many countries. But east-west connections are weak, and even north-south connections. There's enormous potential to accelerate decarbonization both in the United States and in Canada by increasing these interties. Making the grid more resilient, increasing distributed generation in order to power the electrification both of transport but also of heating.
Okay, well, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, sir, because I didn't know you said you weren't here to talk about amendments to the bill. I do have limited time, so I'm just going to move on to Ms. Joseph. So thank you, Professor. Ms. Joseph, you've mentioned that the advisory board and the people that are put on to that report are going to bring in different views. Right now, it's completely up to the discretion of just one minister. Do you think that that's the right approach? A country as big as Canada, I would imagine there are lots of qualified people with varied backgrounds, and it'd be difficult for any one department or any one minister to know all the people that should be representing to flesh out Canada's net zero future.
20 seconds, please, for a brief response.
Sure. I agree that it should not be one minister, and in our view, that the governor and council and the diversity of ministers, so industry minister, finance minister, employment minister, should have a role in determining who's at that table.
Thank you. Am I correct that it is Mr. Biddle who will be batting cleanup today?
I believe so,
Okay.
but if my colleagues want to prove me wrong, they're more than welcome to jump in. But if I can start with Dr. Khan, I was wondering if you could respond to the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers and their suggestion that there needs to be economic targets baked into this legislation.
So if we're to talk about economics or economics in general, I think that we can't, we can't hide the fact that there is a huge divestment happening from the fossil fuel sector. BlackRock Investments, the biggest asset manager in the world, came out with research recently showing that $15 trillion have been divested from the fossil fuel sector from different portfolios over the last decade. So yes, if we're thinking about economies, we have to face the fact that the fossil fuel sector is in decline. Fossil fuel companies are investing in renewable energy out of goodwill, or do they see that decarbonization is inevitable? If we're talking about jobs in the fossil fuel sector, Jim Stanford released a report for environmental defense in 2021, January. Direct employment in fossil fuel jobs, about 170,000. Since 2014, 33,000 of those have diminished, have been lost. Since COVID, another 17,500 jobs in the fossil fuel sector. Are they because of climate policy, or are they because of other fluctuations in the economy? Between 2014 and 2019, for every job lost in the fossil fuel sector, 42 were created in other industries. So I think that, if we're going to talk economics, we should be clear and we should make it visible about where, the jobs are growing, where we're losing them, why we're losing them. And as I said before, I don't see economy and environment as being separate. The federal budget clearly placed a climate lens at the heart of the economy. We have now, we don't just think about GDP, the federal budget placed a well-being, a quality of life framework to assess what our economy really is. So, there is an expansion happening, and we have to take that into consideration.
Mr. Chair, if I pause for a minute, I believe Madame Posey has a...
Yeah, I think I've got well, maybe this is what Madame Posey, it's about translation, because I just got a message from the clerk as well. Could we, we're going to obviously pause here. Can we see if we can get translation, interpretation back on track? Are you, is it working now by any chance? Can some of you hear me in French?
Can others hear me in English? Can you hear me in English?
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Biddle.
I appreciate the answer, Dr. Khan, but with respect to this bill, do you think this is the appropriate legislation to do as the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers suggests in terms of an amendment?
So this is not an innovative bill in the sense that it follows other national climate framework laws. And in that respect, I don't see the rationale in including an economic objective. I see net zero as an investment opportunity. And if we look at the UK example, for instance, what has an assessment of the first 10 years of the UK legislation given us? Well, it's been hugely influential in terms of investment security for the renewables. It's unlocked the huge capital investments that needed to be made because they're carbon budgets that are planned for 5 years and plans for 10 years. So that visibility, that is an economic stimulus, and that's what we need, and that's what's holding Canada back at the moment.
And building again on, asking you to comment again on Ms. Joseph's comments with respect to having many different sector representatives on the panel. And I don't know how many dozens of people this could include. I was just wondering, in terms of, does there need to be sector-specific individuals, or are other individuals, climate scientists, able to provide insight into on how best to advise the government, even across different sectors and across the economy?
Again, I have to say that we have to take into consideration the political culture and legal culture of Canada. Never does a minister just decide that on their own that they're going to take this. The statutory duty of the minister is should be interpreted in light of our legal culture as well. And even though we're talking about a statutory duty, it's basically about how to steer cumulative conduct of a wide range of actors in the best way that they can. So really, it's if you look at other jurisdictions, it's not just a single person sitting at a desk doing this work. In reality, this happens across the board. We have, the minister will be constrained, obviously, because certain powers and, financial influence, economic power sits in different ministries. So it's actually naive to think that that's how the process will play out in practice.
So, we're pretty much at the 5-minute mark, Mr. Biddle, and we've arrived on time. It's 5:29. I want to thank the witnesses. Really interesting discussion this afternoon, both this panel and the one before. And I just want to thank everyone for being, all the panelists for being here, because we do know that it requires a lot of preparation, and that it's a lot of work. There's a lot of work that goes into this. So thank you to the panelists. Thank you, members, for your stimulating questions. We meet again tomorrow. We meet again tomorrow afternoon at the same time, same channel. And then next week we go into clause by clause, well informed by the testimony we've been hearing. So I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Mr. Longfield, and I don't see anyone objecting to that. I will therefore bring the meeting to a close. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci les membres.